The moment Elena Cross pushed open that unmarked door, she sealed her fate. What she saw in the private dining room, the spilled wine, the gasping man, the cold-eyed stranger who should have killed her for witnessing it, changed everything. One decision from a mafia boss, one terrified waitress, and a dangerous pull neither of them saw coming. If you want to know how a single night can rewrite your entire life, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Bye! The snow came down hard that night, the kind that made the city look cleaner than it had any right to be. Elena Cross stood outside Corvo's, one of those restaurants where the lighting cost more than her monthly rent, watching through the frosted glass as people who'd never worry about money laughed over plates she couldn't pronounce. Her uniform was too thin for February, but the manager had a rule about coats. They made the staff look sloppy, he said, like they didn't take pride in their work. Pride didn't keep you warm, but Elena had learned not to argue about things that wouldn't change. She pushed through the heavy door into the heat, shaking snow from her hair. The main dining room hummed with the low murmur of wealth. Crystal against china, subdued laughter. The kind of conversation that never got too loud because these people didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. Table 7 needs water, Marcus said as she passed the bar. He didn't look up from the wine he was decanting, some bottle that probably cost more than her car had before it died. And the VIP section is locked down tonight. Don't go near it. Elena nodded, already reaching for a pitcher. The VIP section was always getting locked down for one reason or another. Sometimes it was celebrities who didn't want photos taken. Sometimes it was business deals that required privacy. She'd stopped being curious about it after her first month. She made her rounds through the main room, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling at people who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. That was fine. She'd gotten good at being invisible. Invisible meant tips landed on the table without anyone remembering your face. Invisible meant you got through your shift without incident. The night crawled forward. Her feet ached. The couple at table 12 kept sending their steaks back, too rare, too well done, too something. And each time she delivered the plate with the same patient smile, knowing her tip was evaporating with every trip to the kitchen. By 9 o'clock, the main rush had settled into a comfortable lull, and Elena let herself lean against the server station, just for a moment. That's when she heard it, a sound from the back hallway near the private rooms. Something between a shout and a gasp, cut off too quickly. She straightened. The hallway was empty, the burgundy carpet swallowing any footsteps. She should have stayed put, should have kept her head down, finished her shift, gone home to her apartment where the heat barely worked and the neighbor's dog barked at shadows. But Elena had never been great at should. She moved down the hallway, past the restrooms toward the unmarked door at the end. The sound came again, a crash, like glass breaking. Her hand was on the doorknob before she could think better of it. The door swung open. The room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate, lit by a chandelier that threw warm light over dark wood paneling and a table set for two. One chair was overturned. Wine spread across the white tablecloth in a bloom of deep red. And on the floor, a man in an expensive suit clutched his throat, his face going purple, his eyes bulging with terror. Standing over him was someone else entirely. He was tall, maybe 6'2", dressed in black that somehow made the shadows gather around him. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so completely devoid of warmth. He held a wine glass loosely in one hand, studying the dying man the way you'd study an insect you'd just stepped on, with detached interest and absolutely no remorse. Those eyes lifted to Elena. She froze. For a second, maybe two, nobody moved. The man on the floor made a wet, rattling sound. The stranger tilted his head, expression unchanging, and Elena felt something cold slide down her spine. This wasn't shock she was seeing. It was calculation. "Wrong door," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Somehow, that made it worse. Elena's survival instincts finally kicked in. She stepped back, hand fumbling for the doorknob behind her. "I didn't see anything," she said. The words came out shaky, unconvincing. "I was just... the noise. I thought... You thought you'd investigate." He set the wine glass down on the table with a soft click. That was a mistake. The man on the floor had stopped moving. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd grown up in this city. She knew what happened to people who saw things they shouldn't. She knew about bodies found in the river, about witnesses who disappeared, about the way certain names made people cross the street. "Please," she said, "I won't say anything. I swear. I work here. I'm nobody. What's your name?" The question threw her. "What? Your name?" He moved then, stepping over the body with the kind of ease that said this wasn't his first. "Tell me your name." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs had gone numb, and he was between her and the only exit, and something about the way he looked at her suggested running would only make things interesting. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Cross." He considered this. "How long have you worked here, Elena Cross?" 3 months? Family?" "No, nobody." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "That's unfortunate." She didn't understand what he meant until he pulled out his phone, typed something with his thumb, and slipped it back into his pocket. When he looked at her again, his expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite parse. Not quite sympathy, but not the cold calculation from before either. "You have 2 choices," he said. "You can scream, bring people running, try to explain what you saw." He gestured toward the body. "In which case, you'll spend the next few hours talking to the police, and the next few days wondering when the people I work with will come to make sure you stay quiet. Or what? Or you can sit down, stay quiet, and let me handle this." Elena's hands were shaking. "And then what happens to me?" "That depends on how smart you are." It wasn't a choice. Not really. They both knew it. But he'd given her the illusion of one, and that felt significant somehow, though she couldn't say why. She sat. The chair was cold, the leather slick under her palms. The stranger watched her for a moment longer, then made another phone call. This one was brief, just a few words in a language Elena didn't recognize. When he hung up, he pulled out the other chair and sat across from her, casual as anything, like they were just 2 people having dinner. "What's your real name?" Elena asked. Fear made her reckless. "Or is that not something you give out?" "Damien," he said. "Damien Vale." The name hit her like a punch to the chest. Even she'd heard of Damien Vale, the man who controlled half the city's underground, the one people whispered about in bars and forgot about in daylight, the ghost who ran an empire from the shadows. She'd just walked into his private room and found him standing over a body. "I'm going to die," she said, more to herself than to him. "Not tonight." "How do you know?" "Because I just decided you won't." It should have been comforting. Instead, it just reminded her how little control she had over anything anymore. They sat in silence. The body on the floor had stopped being a person and become a problem, something to be dealt with, and Elena hated how quickly her brain made that shift. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. She stopped checking the time. Then the door opened. 2 men came in, both broad-shouldered, both moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice. They didn't react to the body, didn't react to Elena. Just got to work, one of them pulling out a phone to take photos, while the other rolled the corpse into a heavy plastic tarp that seemed to materialize from nowhere. "Check her," Damien said. Before Elena could process what that meant, one of the men was beside her, hands running over her uniform with professional detachment. She jerked back, but Damien's voice stopped her. "He's looking for a wire. Stay still." She stayed still. The search was quick, thorough, humiliating. When it was done, the man stepped back and shook his head. "Clean." "Good." Damien stood, buttoning his jacket. "Take her to the estate." Elena's stomach dropped. "Wait, what? No, I can just go home. I won't. You'll be dead by morning if I let you leave." He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. "Someone just tried to poison me in my own secured location. That means there's a breach. Until I know who and how, anyone who is here tonight is a liability. I didn't do anything." "I know. That's why you're alive." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You can fight this if you want, make a scene, but you'll still end up in the car, and you'll have bruises you didn't need. Your choice." It was the second time tonight he'd given her a false choice. Elena wondered if this was how he always worked, or if he was doing her some kind of twisted courtesy. She stood up. Her legs shook, but they held. "Fine." One of the men, the one who'd searched her, gestured toward the door. Elena walked, feeling Damien's eyes on her back the whole way. They left through the kitchen, avoiding the main dining room entirely, and stepped out into the snow. A black car waited in the alley, engine running, windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. The door opened. Elena got in because there wasn't another option. Damien slid in beside her. The car moved before her door even closed. They drove through the city in silence. Elena watched the familiar streets slide past, the bodega where she bought coffee, the laundromat where she washed her uniforms, the pharmacy with the broken neon sign. Her whole life compressed into a few dirty blocks. It had never looked smaller. "What happened back there?" she asked finally. "To that man." "Ricin," Damien said. "In the wine. Slow acting enough that I would have made it home before symptoms showed. Smart, if it had worked. But it didn't. He drank from my glass by mistake. Probably thought he was being clever, testing it first." Damien's expression didn't change. Irony has a sense of humor. Elena swallowed hard. "You were just going to let him die? Would you have preferred I saved the man trying to kill me?" She didn't have an answer for that. The city gave way to suburbs, then to estates hidden behind gates and walls. The car turned onto a private road, tires crunching over gravel, and then they were pulling up to something that looked more like a fortress than a home. Stone walls, security cameras, men in dark suits stationed at the entrance. "Welcome to my world," Damien said, and there was something bitter in his voice that Elena didn't understand. The car stopped. The door opened. Elena stepped out into the cold, looking up at the massive house in front of her, and felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. Inside the house was all dark wood and colder wealth, art that belonged in museums, floors so polished she could see her reflection. A staircase that curved up into shadows. Damien led her through hallways that seemed to go on forever, past rooms with closed doors until they reached one that opened into something softer. A bedroom, tastefully decorated. Nothing like the cells she'd been expecting. "You'll stay here," he said. "Don't try to leave. Don't try to contact anyone. Just stay put until I figure out what to do with you." "How long?" "As long as it takes." He moved to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. "What if I'd screamed, back at the restaurant? What would you have done?" Damien turned back. For the first time, she saw something like weariness in his face. "I don't know," he said quietly. That's what made it interesting. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Elena heard a lock slide into place. She was alone. She moved to the window, pulled back the curtain. The ground stretched out below, floodlit and pristine, surrounded by walls too high to climb. Beautiful and suffocating all at once. Elena pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, and tried to remember what her life had looked like 6 hours ago. It felt like something that had happened to a different person. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back and she sat up, heart pounding. The room was exactly as she'd left it. The door was still locked. Through the window, she could see men patrolling the grounds, their breath fogging in the morning air. A knock made her jump. "Come in," she said, then realized how stupid that was. She was locked in. But the door opened anyway. A woman in her 50s stepped inside, carrying a tray with breakfast. She had kind eyes and an expression that suggested very little surprised her anymore. "Mr. Vale thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I'm Marta. I manage the house." Elena stared at the food. Eggs, toast, fruit that actually looked fresh. "Is this poisoned?" Marta's lips twitched. "If Mr. Vale wanted you dead, you'd already be gone. Eat." She did, because she hadn't eaten since her break at the restaurant 12 hours ago. And survival meant taking care of the basics even when nothing else made sense. The food was good. That felt wrong, somehow. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now you wait. Mr. Vale has people to see, arrangements to make." Marta collected the empty tray. "If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Dial 0. Someone will come." "Can I leave this room?" "No." At least she was honest. The day crawled by. Elena explored her prison, which took about 5 minutes. Bathroom with marble counters, closet with clothes that weren't hers but fit anyway, which was its own kind of unsettling. A bookshelf with titles she'd never had time to read. She tried the window again, but it didn't open, and the glass was too thick to break without tools she didn't have. By evening, she was climbing the walls from boredom and fear and the strange combination of both. When the door opened and Damien stepped inside, she practically lunged at him. "How long are you keeping me here?" "Good evening to you too." He closed the door, leaned against it. He'd changed clothes, she noticed. Still black, still expensive, but different. "How are you finding your accommodations?" "I'm finding them very locked." "For your safety." "You keep saying that like it makes it true." "It is true." He moved into the room, and Elena hated how she stepped back instinctively. "There are people in this city who would love to know what you saw last night. People who would use you to get to me. The only reason you're still breathing is because nobody knows you exist." "Then let me go. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." "You think it's that simple?" Something sharp entered his voice. "You think you can just walk back to your apartment, your job, your life, and nobody will notice? They're already watching your building, already asking questions at the restaurant. You're a loose end, Elena. Loose ends get cut." The weight of it settled over her. "So what? I'm just supposed to stay here forever? Until it's safe? Or until I decide what else to do with you?" "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed to the window, looking out at the same view she'd been staring at all day. "Tell me about your mother." The shift in topic threw her. "What? Earlier you said you had no family, but everyone comes from somewhere." "She's dead. Has been for 3 years." Elena didn't know why she was answering. "Cancer. The kind that moves fast when you can't afford to fight it." "I'm sorry. Are you?" He turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't read. "What was her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Cross." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "Why do you care?" "Sarah Cross," he repeated, like he was testing the sound of it. "Did she ever talk about the city? About the people she knew before you were born?" "Not really. She worked a lot. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. We didn't have time for stories." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Why? Did you know her?" "Maybe. I'm not sure yet." He moved toward the door. "I'll have Marta bring you dinner. Try to get some rest." "Wait." But he was already gone, the lock clicking back into place. Elena stood in the middle of her beautiful prison and tried to make sense of anything. Her mother, Damien Vale. The strange look on his face when she'd said the name. It didn't add up, which meant she was missing pieces. She'd never been good at leaving puzzles unsolved. Odd. 3 days passed like that. Isolated, fed, watched. Elena learned the routines of the house through the window, the guards changing shifts, Marta's arrival with meals, the black cars that came and went at irregular intervals. She learned which floorboards creaked, which corner of her room the security camera couldn't see, how long it took for someone to respond when she called. Damien came every evening, always around 7. Sometimes he asked questions about her life, her mother, the restaurant. Sometimes he just sat in the chair by the window and read through papers while she pretended not to watch him. It was the strangest thing, this routine they'd fallen into, this prisoner and captor dynamic that somehow didn't feel quite as simple as it should. On the 4th night, he brought a box. "I found something," he said, setting it on the bed. "Letters. Your mother's handwriting, I think. I want you to look at them." Elena's hands trembled as she opened the box. Inside were envelopes, yellowed with age, addressed to someone named D.V. She pulled out the first letter and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was her mother's. No question. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "My father's study. Kept them locked away." Damien's voice was carefully neutral. "He never told me about them. I only found them yesterday, going through his things." Elena read. The letter was dated 26 years ago. It talked about fear, about a debt, about a choice her mother had to make. And at the bottom, a line that made Elena's breath catch. "I can't let him use the baby against you. I'm leaving tonight. Please don't follow me. Please let us disappear." She looked up at Damien. "What does this mean?" "It means," he said slowly, "that your mother knew my father. It means she was running from something or someone connected to my family. And it means—" He stopped. "It means what?" "Read the date." Elena looked. 26 years ago. Almost exactly 9 months before she was born. The room tilted. "No," she said. "I don't know for certain, but the timing—" "No." Elena stood up, the letter falling from her hands. That's not. My mother would have told me. She wouldn't have. She was protecting you from my father, from this world. Damien's expression was unreadable. It's what parents do when they love you. Elena's mind raced. Her mother's secrets, the way she'd always refused to talk about Elena's father, the careful way she'd built their life in the shadows, never staying in one place too long, never drawing attention. So what are you saying? Her voice came out ragged. That your father, that we're some... I'm saying it's possible. I'm saying we need to find out. He picked up the fallen letter, smoothed it carefully. There are other letters. Read them. Maybe they'll tell us more. He left her there with the box, with her mother's words, with the possibility that everything she'd known about herself was wrong. Elena read through the night. Each letter painted a picture. Her mother, young and scared, caught up in something she didn't understand. A man, Damien's father, who'd been kinder than his empire suggested, but still trapped by it. A pregnancy that became a threat, a decision to run. By dawn, Elena had pieced together the truth. Her mother had known Damien's father, had maybe even loved him, but loving someone in that world came with costs Sarah Cross hadn't been willing to pay. So she'd left, vanished, built a new life where the shadows couldn't reach. Except shadows always reach eventually. When Damien returned in the morning, Elena was sitting by the window, the letters spread out around her. She loved him, she said without preamble. Your father. She loved him and it terrified her. I know. Did he know about me? I don't think so. If he had, he would have... Damien stopped. He would have done something. Found us. Brought us back. Used me to keep her close. Yes. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. So she spent her whole life running from what I just walked straight into. That's almost funny. Elena, don't. She stood, facing him. I need to know something. When you found these letters, when you realized who my mother might have been to your father, did it change anything? Am I still a prisoner here, or did I just become family? Damien was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet what you are. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her. Then figure it out, Elena said. Because I can't keep living in this limbo. Either I'm someone you're protecting or someone you're controlling, but I need to know which. He left without answering, and Elena stood alone in her room full of her mother's secrets, wondering if Sarah Cross had ever stood in a similar room, asking similar questions, getting the same non-answers, like mother, like daughter, trapped by men who dealt in power and called it protection. The thought should have made her angry. Instead, it just made her tired. Elena stopped counting days after the first week. Time moved differently in the estate, stretched thin during the empty hours, then compressed when Damien appeared with more questions, more pieces of a puzzle she'd never asked to solve. The letters had changed something between them, though neither acknowledged it directly. He looked at her differently now, with a wariness that felt almost like recognition, and she couldn't decide if that made things better or worse. On the 8th morning, Marta brought breakfast and stayed longer than usual, fussing with the curtains Elena hadn't touched. You need some air, she said finally. Real air, not just what comes through the vents. I'm not allowed to leave. Mr. Vale didn't say you couldn't walk the grounds, just that you couldn't leave them. Marta gave her a meaningful look. There's a difference. 20 minutes later, Elena stood on the back terrace, breathing cold air that tasted like freedom, even though the walls surrounding the property reminded her it wasn't. The estate grounds were bigger than she'd realized from the window, gardens gone dormant for winter, a stone path winding through bare trees, a fountain frozen mid-cascade. Beautiful in that expensive, controlled way that made her think of museums. She walked because staying still had started to feel like dying slowly. The path led her past the main house toward what looked like a greenhouse, its glass panels fogged with condensation. She almost turned back, but then she saw movement inside. Damien, his jacket off, dirt on his hands, doing something that looked completely out of place for a man who killed people over dinner. Elena pushed open the door. The air inside hit her first, warm and humid, heavy with the smell of earth and growing things. Plants she didn't recognize crowded the tables, some flowering, some just green. Damien stood at the far end, carefully repotting something with white blooms, and he didn't look up when she entered. Gardenias, he said. My mother's favorite. They're temperamental. Too much water and they rot. Too little and they die anyway. Elena moved closer, watching his hands work the soil with unexpected gentleness. I didn't picture you as someone who gardens. Most people don't picture me as someone who does anything besides what they've heard. He finally looked at her. Marta let you out. She said you didn't technically forbid it. She's right. I didn't. He set down the pot, brushed dirt from his hands. How are you sleeping? I'm not. The letters? Everything. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, though the greenhouse was warm enough. I keep thinking about what my mother gave up, what she ran from, whether it was worth it. Was it? I don't know. She died broke and tired and alone, but she was free, in a way, or she thought she was. Elena touched one of the gardenia leaves, soft as skin. Did your father ever talk about her, after she left? No. But my father didn't talk about most things that mattered. Damien's voice went flat. He kept those letters locked away for 26 years. That says something. That he cared? That he was weak. The words came out harsh. He built an empire on strength and let one woman make him sentimental. It's probably what got him killed in the end. Elena's head snapped up. What? 2 years ago. Car accident, officially. But my father didn't make mistakes with cars. Damien picked up another pot, his movements precise, controlled. Someone got to him. I just don't know who yet. Is that what this is about? The poisoning at the restaurant? That's what everything is about. Power, revenge, the settling of old debts. It's all anyone in this world knows how to do. He paused. Your mother understood that. That's why she ran. They stood in silence, surrounded by his dead mother's favorite flowers and the ghost of Elena's mother's choices. The greenhouse felt too small suddenly, too warm, and Elena couldn't tell if she wanted to leave or stay. I need to know something, she said finally. If the letters are real, if your father and my mother, does that make you my brother? Half-brother. Maybe. If the timing's right and if my father was being honest in his own letters, which isn't guaranteed. Does it matter to you? If I am? Damien set down the gardening tools, wiped his hands on a cloth that had seen better days. When he looked at her, his expression was unreadable. I don't know yet. Does it matter to you? Yes. Because if you're my brother, then I need to stop being afraid of you. And if you're not, she stopped. If I'm not, then I need to figure out what you are instead. Something shifted in his face, gone too quick to name. You should get inside, it's cold. You're out here. I'm used to it. Elena didn't move. Why did you bring me to the greenhouse? I didn't. You followed me. You knew I was there. You could have sent me away. I could have. He picked up his jacket, shrugged it on. But I didn't. He walked past her toward the door, and Elena felt something pull tight in her chest. Some thread of connection she didn't want to examine too closely. She followed him back to the house, through hallways that felt less like a prison every day, and she hated herself a little for the adjustment, for how quickly a person could get used to captivity if the cage was nice enough. That afternoon, Elena met the rest of Damien's world. She was in the library, an actual library with floor-to-ceiling books and leather chairs that smelled like old money, when voices drifted in from the hallway. Male voices, multiple, talking over each other with the easy aggression of people who'd known each other too long. Telling you it's a mistake. You can't just keep her here indefinitely. I can do whatever I need to do. And when someone notices, when they start asking questions, let them ask. The voices got closer. Elena stood, not sure if she should leave or stay, and then they were in the doorway, Damien and 2 other men, all of them stopping short when they saw her. Who's this? The first man asked. He was shorter than Damien, stockier, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His eyes were sharp, calculating. Elena Cross, Damien said. She's staying here for a while. Sultan. Staying here. The second man laughed, but there was no humor in it. He was taller, leaner, with the kind of face that probably charmed people right up until he stopped pretending. That's what we're calling it now? Marco, Nico. Damien's voice carried a warning. Show some manners. Marco, the one with the scar, studied Elena with open curiosity. You're the girl from the restaurant, the one who walked in on the Rossi hit. That wasn't supposed to be public information, Damien said. Nothing's private when there's a breach. Nico moved into the room, circling Elena like she was something interesting he'd found on the street. So what's the play here? We keeping her long-term, or is this temporary? That's not your concern. It is if she becomes a liability. We've already got enough heat without adding a civilian witness to the mix. Nico stopped directly in front of Elena. No offense. Some taken, Elena said. Marco grinned. She's got spine. I like her. Your approval wasn't requested, Damien said, but there was something almost amused in his tone. Elena, these are my brothers, Marco and Nico. They work with me. By work with, he means clean up his messes, Nico added, which lately has been a full-time job. And you're both doing it loudly in my house. Why? Because the Belmonts are making moves. Word is they're the ones who ordered the hit on you, and now they're sniffing around trying to figure out what happened to their guy. Marco pulled out his phone, showed Damien something on the screen. This came through an hour ago. They want a meeting. Damien's expression went cold. When? Tonight. Neutral ground. They're saying it's to discuss terms. Terms for what? That's what we're supposed to find out. Marco pocketed the phone. You going? Do I have a choice? You always have a choice. Some of them are just worse than others. Nico glanced at Elena again. What about her? She coming along for the show? She stays here. That's probably smart. The Belmonts aren't known for their hospitality. Nico headed for the door, Marco following. We'll pick you up at 8. Try not to get killed before then. They left, their voices fading down the hallway, and Elena turned to Damien. Who are the Belmonts? Competition? Old family, old money, old grudges? He moved to the window, looking out at nothing. They've been pushing at my territory for months. The poisoning was just the latest escalation. And you're going to meet with them anyway. If I don't, it looks like weakness. Weakness gets you dead faster than poison does. Elena sat down in one of the leather chairs, her legs suddenly unsteady. This is your life. People trying to kill you. Meetings that might be traps. Brothers who talk about murder like it's boring. Yes. And my mother ran from this. Smart woman. But you're still here. Damien turned to face her. I didn't have anywhere else to run to. This is all I've ever known. There was something in his voice that made Elena's chest ache. Not pity, she had a feeling he'd hate that, but recognition, maybe. Of someone trapped by circumstances they didn't choose, making the best of options that all looked bad. Be careful tonight, she said. Why? Because if you die, I'm stuck here with no idea what happens next. His mouth curved, almost a smile. Practical. I'm a waitress. We're good at risk assessment. Former waitress. I'm going to need a job again eventually, assuming I survive this. You will, Damien said, and he sounded certain. I don't make promises I can't keep. He left her there in the library, surrounded by books about people and places that felt less real than her current situation, and Elena tried to remember what normal had felt like before everything changed. The attempt failed. Normal was already starting to feel like something that had happened to someone else. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching the driveway, waiting for headlights that didn't come. 8 o'clock passed. 9. 10. By 11, she'd worn a path in the carpet pacing, and by midnight, she'd convinced herself something had gone wrong. When she heard footsteps in the hallway, she was at the door before it opened. Damien stood there, jacket off, tie loosened, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. There was blood on his shirt. Are you hurt? Elena reached for him before thinking, her hands checking for wounds. Not mine. He caught her wrists, held them still. I'm fine. You're covered in blood. I said I'm fine. It got complicated. Elena pulled free, stepping back. What happened? The meeting was a setup. 3 of theirs, 2 of mine. We made it out. He moved past her into the room, heading straight for the bathroom. The Belmonts wanted to send a message. We sent one back. She followed him, watched as he stripped off the shirt and threw it in the trash. There were bruises already forming on his ribs, a cut along his shoulder that looked shallow but mean. Let me help, she said. Let me help. He went still, then nodded once. Elena found the first aid kit under the sink. Of course, there was a first aid kit. Probably every room in this house had one, and set to work cleaning the cut. Her hands shook slightly, but she kept them steady enough to do the job. You're good at this, Damien said. My mother was clumsy. I got a lot of practice. Elena taped down a bandage, checked the placement. Who died tonight? No one. But it was close. Which side came closer? Does it matter? Yes. Because if it was yours, then the people trying to kill you are getting better at it. And if it was theirs, then you're making enemies who will want revenge. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. Either way, this doesn't end well. It never does. That's not the point. Then what is? Surviving long enough to see what happens next. Elena finished with the bandages and stepped back. Damien turned to face her, and they were close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of whatever he'd done tonight still sitting heavy on his shoulders. Thank you, he said quietly. For the first aid? For not asking if they deserved it. Elena's throat tightened. Would it matter if I did? Probably not, but I'm tired of people asking questions they don't really want answered. He left, taking the ruined shirt with him, and Elena sat on the edge of the bathtub, feeling like she'd crossed some invisible line tonight. From prisoner to something else. From stranger to someone who cleaned blood off a killer's hands and didn't flinch. Her mother would have been horrified. Or maybe she wouldn't have been. Maybe Sarah Cross had stood in similar bathrooms, made similar choices, felt the same confused pull toward a world that should have repelled her. The thought didn't comfort Elena as much as it should have. The next few days brought a routine that felt dangerously close to normal. Elena spent mornings in the library, afternoons walking the grounds, evenings in her room reading her mother's letters over and over looking for answers that weren't there. Damien came and went at odd hours, sometimes clean and composed, sometimes carrying the evidence of his work in split knuckles and careful movements. They talked more now. Small things at first. Books, weather, the irritating way Marco and Nico bickered. Then bigger things. Her mother's struggles. His father's coldness. The strange inheritance they might share if the letters were telling the truth. We could do a DNA test, Elena said one evening. They were in the greenhouse again, Damien showing her how to prune the gardenias without killing them. No, for sure. Would that change anything? It would give us answers. Sometimes answers just create new problems. He handed her the pruning shears, guided her hands to the right branch. There. Cut just above the node. Elena made the cut clean and certain. You're avoiding the question. I'm considering the implications. If we're related, then you have a legitimate claim to part of my father's estate. That makes you valuable. That makes you a target. I'm already a target. I saw you kill someone, remember? That was an accident. This would be deliberate. He took the shears back, set them aside. The families that want me dead would love to know I have a sister. They'd use you to hurt me or leverage you to get what they want. It's what I'd do if the positions were reversed. Then we don't tell anyone. We just know, for ourselves. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of a leaf with unexpected gentleness. What if we are related? What does that make us? Family, I guess. Isn't that what you wanted? I don't know what I wanted. My father was the only family I had, and he's dead. Marco and Nico are brothers in every way that matters, but it's not the same. They chose this life. You didn't. He looked at her then, something raw in his expression. What if having family just means having another person you can't protect? Elena understood then what he wasn't saying, that caring was a weakness in his world, that attachment got people killed, that he'd already decided she mattered, which made her dangerous to both of them. We do the test anyway, she said, because I need to know who I am, and you need to know who you're protecting. The rest we figure out later. You're stubborn. I'm practical. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Your mother must have been hell to deal with. She was impossible. I got it from her. They did the test 3 days later, a simple cheek swab sent off to a lab that Marco knew, which meant it was quiet and fast and wouldn't raise questions. The results would take a week. Elena tried not to think about them, tried not to build expectations around what they might say, but at night she found herself imagining what it would mean to have a brother, someone who shared her blood, her history, the same ghost of a father they'd never fully know. The week crawled forward. Elena learned more about the estate, met more of Damien's people, started to understand the careful hierarchy that kept his world running. She learned that Marcus, who told her not to go near the VIP section that first night, worked for Damien, and had been the one to clean up the restaurant after. She learned that Marta had been with the family for 30 years and knew more secrets than anyone acknowledged. She learned that the gardener was a former enforcer who'd taken a bullet to the spine and found peace in pruning roses. Everyone here had a story. Everyone had done things they didn't talk about in daylight, and somehow Elena was becoming one of them. On the 6th day, Damien found her in the library again. She'd started thinking of it as her space, which probably said something about how far she'd drifted from her old life. "The Belmonts want another meeting," he said without preamble. Elena looked up from her book. "Are you going?" "I have to. They're offering a truce." "Do you believe them?" "No. But refusing would start a war I'm not ready to fight yet." He sat down across from her, tension visible in every line of his body. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something happens, if I don't come back, Marco will get you out. He has instructions, money set aside. You'll be safe." Elena's stomach dropped. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm not stupid. The Belmonts don't offer truces unless they're planning something worse." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wanted you to know you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, you're protected." "I don't want protection. I want you not to go." "That's not an option." "Everything's an option. You just choose the ones that keep you in this cycle." "You think I want this?" His voice went sharp. "You think I enjoy going to meetings that might be executions? That I like living in a fortress because leaving means dying? Then why do you do it?" "Because it's what I have, this empire, this life, these choices. They're all I've ever known. My father built this, and now it's mine whether I want it or not." He stood, moved to the window like he couldn't sit still. "You got to have a mother who loved you enough to run. I got a father who loved power more than he loved anything, and now I'm stuck maintaining what he built because letting it fall apart would mean he died for nothing." The rawness in his voice made Elena's chest ache. She stood, crossed to him, and did something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She touched him, just her hand on his arm, gentle and grounding. "He didn't die for nothing. He died because someone in your world saw weakness and exploited it. That's not on you." "Everything is on me now." "Then let me help carry it." Damien looked at her, really looked, and Elena saw the moment he decided something. "The test results come back tomorrow." "I know." "If they say what I think they'll say, things change. You understand that?" "I understand that they'll change either way. We just decide how." He left for the meeting that night, and Elena watched from her window as the car pulled away, taillights disappearing into darkness. She sat there until dawn, sleeping in fits, jumping at every sound. When the sun finally came up and Damien still wasn't back, she stopped pretending not to worry. Marco found her pacing the hallway around 7. "He's fine," he said. "Meeting ran long. They're handling the aftermath." "What aftermath?" "The kind that requires cleanup crews." Marco's expression was carefully neutral. "The truce didn't take." Elena's hands clenched. "Where is he?" "Safe house in the city. He'll be back by noon." Marco studied her. "You care about him." "He's keeping me alive." "Of course I care." "That's not what I meant." Elena met his eyes. "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing. Just making an observation." Marco turned to leave, then paused. "The test results came in early. They're on his desk. If you want to look before he gets back, I won't stop you." He walked away, leaving Elena alone in the hallway with a choice. She could wait for Damien, let him open the results first. Maintain the pretense that she wasn't desperate to know. Or she could walk into his study, open the envelope, and face the truth alone. She walked to the study. The envelope sat on the desk, plain white, innocuous except for what it contained. Elena picked it up, felt the weight of it, the sharp edges of paper inside. Her hand shook. She opened it. The words blurred at first, medical terminology she had to read twice to understand, but the conclusion was clear enough. Genetic markers. Probability of relation. 99.7% certainty. Damien Vale was her half-brother. Elena sat down hard in his chair, the paper crinkling in her grip. All her life she'd been alone, just her and her mother against the world. No father, no siblings, no family beyond the two of them. And now, suddenly, impossibly, she had a brother who killed people, a brother who'd kidnapped her to keep her safe, A brother who grew gardenias in a greenhouse and looked at her sometimes like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. She was still sitting there staring at the results when Damien came home. He stopped in the doorway, took in the scene, and something shifted in his expression. "You opened them." "Marco said they were here." "He would." Damien moved into the room, closed the door behind him. "So, now you know." "Now I know." Elena held up the paper. 99.7%. That's pretty definitive. It is. Are you angry I looked? No. I'm tired and I'm not sure what this changes, but I'm not angry. He sat down across from her, and Elena saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of whatever had happened at the meeting still sitting heavy. "We're siblings. Half-siblings. Same father, different mothers, 2 decades apart." That's one way to put it. How would you put it? Elena set down the paper carefully. "I'd say we're family now, whether we like it or not." "And do you? Like it?" "I don't know yet. Ask me again when my brother stops walking into death traps for a living." Something like relief crossed his face, gone as quick as it came. "That might take a while." "Then I guess we have time to figure it out." They sat in silence, the test results between them, the morning light streaming through the window, and Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not safety, exactly, but the beginning of belonging, the start of having someone who shared her blood, her history, the strange inheritance neither of them had asked for. Damien stood, moved to the window, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet. "My father would have loved you. You're everything he wanted me to be. Stubborn, fearless, too smart for your own good." He sounds complicated. He was, but he would have protected you if he'd known you existed. Damien turned back to face her. "I'll do better than protect you. I'll give you the choice to leave when it's safe. Go back to your life or build a new one, whatever you want." "What if I want to stay?" "Then you stay, but not as a prisoner, as family." Elena stood, crossed to him, and did something she'd never done before. She hugged him, quick and awkward, the kind of embrace people give when they're not used to touching. Damien went rigid for a moment, then relaxed, his arms coming up to return the gesture with careful precision. "Family," Elena said against his shoulder. "That's going to take some getting used to. For both of us." They pulled apart, and Elena saw something in her brother's face that might have been hope, or might have been fear of hoping. She understood the feeling. Everything about this was impossible. The circumstances, the timing, the strange path that had led her from a restaurant to a greenhouse to a study where she learned she wasn't alone anymore. But impossible didn't mean unwanted, and Elena had learned a long time ago that family wasn't always the one you were born into. Sometimes it was the one you found in the wreckage, the connections forged in crisis, the people who saw you at your worst and decided to stay anyway. Damien Vale was a killer, a criminal, a man trapped in a world of violence he couldn't escape. But he was also her brother, which meant he was hers to understand, to challenge, to maybe save if she could figure out how. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like purpose. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. One day, Elena was a prisoner pretending to adjust, and the next she was sitting at Damien's breakfast table while Marco complained about supply chain issues and Nico argued about territory disputes like she'd always been there. Nobody questioned it. The DNA results had apparently made the rounds, and now she was family, which meant she existed in a category the others understood, even if she didn't quite yet. "We need to move the shipment through the southern route," Marco was saying, jabbing his fork at a map spread between the coffee cups. "The northern one's compromised since the Belmont situation." "The southern route adds 2 days," Nico countered. 2 days we don't have if the client's serious about the deadline. Then we tell the client to be less serious or find someone else. Damien had been quiet through most of breakfast, nursing black coffee and looking like he'd slept even less than Elena had. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the argument cleanly. "Split it. Half through each route. If one gets hit, we don't lose everything." Marco and Nico exchanged glances, then nodded. It was that easy when Damien made a decision. The discussion ended, the plan formed, everyone moved forward. Elena wondered what that kind of certainty felt like, to speak and have people listen without question. "What about the sister?" Nico asked, and it took Elena a moment to realize he meant her. "We keeping her in the dark on operations, or is she cleared now?" She's sitting right here, Elena said. You could ask her directly. Fair point. Are you cleared? Elena looked at Damien, who was watching her with that unreadable expression he wore when he was thinking 3 moves ahead. That's not my call. Actually, it is, Damien said. You're family. That means you have a right to know what we do, even if you don't participate. The question is whether you want to know. Does knowing make me complicit? You became complicit the moment you didn't report what you saw at the restaurant. Marco's voice was matter of fact, not cruel. This is just deciding how much you want to understand about what you're already part of. Elena thought about her mother's letters, about Sarah Cross running from this exact choice, building a life in ignorance and fear. She thought about the last 3 weeks, the slow erosion of shock into acceptance, the way she'd started to see Damien not as a monster, but as a man doing monstrous things for reasons that made sense in their own terrible logic. Tell me, she said. So they did. Not everything. Damien made it clear there were things she didn't need to know, operations she shouldn't be attached to, even tangentially. But enough. Enough to understand that the empire her father had built, and Damien now ran, dealt in everything the law said you couldn't. Shipments that crossed borders without inspection, money that moved through channels designed to hide its source, protection for businesses that paid not to be bothered by competition or police. It's not all bad, Marco added when Elena's face must have shown something. We don't touch drugs, won't deal in people. There are lines even we don't cross. How noble, Elena said, and regretted the bitterness immediately. It's not about nobility, it's about sustainability. Damien's voice was calm, educational almost. The families that deal in the worst stuff get taken down eventually. Public pressure, federal attention, someone with actual morals decides they can't be ignored anymore. We stay in the gray areas, questionable but not unconscionable. It's how we've survived this long. And the violence? The poisoning attempts and safe house cleanups? That's the cost of doing business in a world where contracts aren't enforceable in court. He met her eyes. I won't pretend it's pretty, but it's contained. We don't hurt civilians. We don't start wars we can't finish. And we sure as hell don't let other families think they can take what's ours without consequences. Elena absorbed this, turning it over in her mind like something she'd found on the street and wasn't sure whether to keep or discard. Part of her wanted to be horrified, to maintain the moral high ground her mother had claimed by running. But another part, the part that had watched Damien tend his mother's flowers with gentle hands, that had seen him build safety around her without asking for anything in return, understood that people were more complicated than the boxes you tried to put them in. Okay, she said finally. Okay, what? Okay, I understand. I don't agree with all of it, but I understand. She pushed back from the table, suddenly needing space. I'm going to the greenhouse. Nobody stopped her. It was becoming her refuge, that humid glass box full of growing things, the one place on the property that felt removed from the weight of everything else. She found herself there more and more, learning the names of plants, the particular needs of each variety, the satisfaction of keeping something alive in a house that dealt so much in death. She was repotting a jasmine when Damien found her an hour later. You handled that better than I expected, he said, leaning against the doorframe. What were you expecting? Tears? Judgment? A dramatic exit? Any of the above. He moved into the greenhouse, picked up a watering can, started tending to the gardenias without asking. My father's second wife, Nico and Marco's mother, lasted 2 months after she found out what we really did. Took the settlement money and disappeared. Can't say I blamed her. Is that why you never married? Afraid someone will run? I never married because marriage in this life is a business transaction, and I wasn't interested in the deals being offered. He set down the watering can, brushed dirt from his hands. But yes, watching people leave because they couldn't handle the truth got old. Elena studied him, this brother she was still learning to read. You thought I'd run. I thought you'd want to. You still might. When things get worse, why do you assume they'll get worse? Because they always do. The Belmonts are regrouping. The failed truce means open conflict eventually. And there are other families circling, waiting to see if I'm weak enough to challenge. He said it like he was discussing the weather, inevitable and unchangeable. It's going to get ugly, Elena. I need you to be prepared for that. Or you could walk away. Let someone else have the empire. And who would that be? Marco and Nico are loyal, but they're not leaders. Without me holding things together, everything my father built falls apart, and the vacuum gets filled by people who don't have our rules. At least we have lines we won't cross. Is that what you tell yourself? That you're the lesser evil? It's what I know. I've seen what happens when territories change hands, the blood that gets spilled, the civilians who get caught in the middle. His voice went rough. I'm not a good man, Elena, but I'm better than the alternatives, and that has to be enough. Elena wanted to argue, to push back against the resignation in his voice, but she didn't have better answers. She'd lived her whole life in this city, seen the territories shift, heard about the violence that erupted when power changed hands. Maybe Damien was right. Maybe some evils were necessary to prevent worse ones. The thought made her feel complicit in a way that breakfast hadn't. Teach me, she said abruptly. Damien's head came up. Teach you what? How to protect myself. How to move in your world without being helpless. If I'm staying, and I think I am, then I need to know how to survive it. That's not... Elena, you don't need to be part of this. You can stay safe here, separate from the operations. Safe and useless. Safe and watching from windows while you go to meetings that might be executions. She stepped closer, making him look at her. You said I'm family. Family means I have value beyond being protected, so teach me how to be valuable. Something shifted in his expression, calculation mixing with what might have been respect. You're sure? I've never been less sure of anything, but I'm doing it anyway. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. We start tomorrow, early, and if at any point you want to stop, you stop. No judgment. Deal. She expected him to leave then, to retreat to whatever crisis was waiting in his office, but instead he stayed working alongside her in comfortable silence, their hands moving through the same rhythms of care and maintenance. It was strange, this quiet domesticity existing alongside everything else, but Elena was learning that contradictions were just part of how this world worked. That night she found her mother's letters again, reading them with new eyes. Sarah Cross had seen this life, touched its edges, and decided it wasn't worth the cost. But Sarah had been alone, had no one to anchor her to anything except fear. Elena had a brother now, an impossible, complicated, morally questionable brother who killed people and grew flowers and looked at her sometimes like she was the only good thing in his compromised life. It made a difference, having that. It made staying possible where running might have been smarter. The training started before dawn. Marco met her in the basement gym, which was apparently a thing rich criminals had, looking far too awake for 5 in the morning. Let's see what we're working with, he said, tossing her a practice knife. Come at me. Elena caught the knife, felt its weight, had absolutely no idea what to do with it. I know, that's why we're here. Come at me anyway. She did, clumsy and obvious, and found herself on the mat 3 seconds later with Marco's hand on her wrist and the knife no longer in her grip. Again, he said. They went again, and again, and again until Elena's body ached and her pride was somewhere on the floor with the knife. Marco was patient but relentless, correcting her stance, her grip, the way she telegraphed every move before making it. You're thinking too much, he said during a water break. This isn't about strategy. It's about muscle memory and instinct. Your body needs to know what to do before your brain catches up. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for survival. In a real fight, you won't have time to think. You'll have seconds, maybe less, to react. He pulled her back to her feet. Now, show me what you'd do if someone grabbed you from behind. The session went on for 2 hours. By the end, Elena could barely lift her arms, but she'd successfully executed 3 defensive moves without Marco having to walk her through them. It felt like progress, however small. Nico took over in the afternoons, teaching her different things: how to read a room, how to spot exits, which people in a crowd were threats and which were marks. He called it situational awareness, but Elena thought of it as paranoia with better marketing. You're looking at the wrong things, he said, as they sat in a coffee shop downtown, her first trip off the estate in weeks. Stop watching the door. Watch the people who are watching the door. Elena shifted her focus, and suddenly the patterns became clear. The man in the corner who kept checking his phone, but never typed anything. The woman at the counter who'd ordered 20 minutes ago and hadn't touched her drink. The teenager near the window who'd glanced at them 3 times in 5 minutes. Now you're getting it, Nico said. Threats don't announce themselves. They position themselves and wait for opportunity. Your job is to see them first. This is exhausting. Welcome to Damien's entire life. He's been doing this since he was 15. Nico leaned back, casual to anyone watching, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never stopped moving. It's why he doesn't sleep much. Hard to rest when you're always calculating odds. Elena thought about Damien in the greenhouse, the only place he seemed to relax. Does it ever get easier? No, you just get better at pretending it does. They stayed another hour, Elena practicing her awareness, learning to see the city the way Damien and his people saw it, as a chessboard of threats and opportunities, allies and enemies, safe zones and kill boxes. By the time they returned to the estate, her head hurt from the constant vigilance. Good first session, Nico said as they pulled through the gates. You didn't miss any of the plants I stationed around the route. There were plants? 3. Different cars, different positions, all watching to make sure we weren't followed. He grinned at her expression. You'll spot them next time, probably. The days fell into a new rhythm after that. Training with Marco and Nico, studying the business with Damien, learning the 1,000 small details that made up life in a criminal empire. Elena absorbed it all with the same determination that had gotten her through community college while working 2 jobs, by refusing to quit even when everything in her screamed to give up. 2 weeks into her training, Damien called her into his office. The Belmonts made another move, he said without preamble. Hit one of our shipments, small one, but the message is clear. What message? That they're not backing down. That this ends with someone dead or someone gone. He pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. I need you to look at something. Elena opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, transaction records, what looked like intercepted communications. It took her a moment to understand what she was seeing. Someone's feeding them information, she said slowly. Someone on the inside. That's what I think, but I need to be sure before I act. He tapped one of the photos. These shipment times, these routes, only a handful of people know them. I need help narrowing down who. Why me? Marco and Nico are too close to it. They defend their people out of loyalty, even if the evidence pointed at them. You're outside that. You can see it clearly. He met her eyes. I'm asking you to help me find the traitor, Elena, but I need you to understand what that means. What happens when we find them? Elena understood. She'd been in this world long enough now to know how betrayal was handled. You'll kill them. Yes. And you want me to help you identify who dies. I want you to help me protect our family. The traitor, whoever they are, has already chosen their side. I'm just asking you to help me confirm which side that is. It was a test, Elena realized. Not of loyalty. She'd already proven that by staying, but of stomach. Of whether she could participate in the machinery of this life rather than just observing it. Her mother had failed this test, had chosen ignorance over involvement. Elena could make the same choice, could say no, maintain distance, keep her hands technically clean. She pulled the folder closer. Show me what you have. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Damien explained the patterns he'd noticed, the timing that seemed too coincidental, the way certain information had reached the Belmonts faster than it should have. Elena added her own observations, seeing connections he'd missed because he was too familiar with the operations to question the basic rhythms. By the time they finished, they'd narrowed it down to 3 people, all trusted, all with access, all people Damien had known for years. I'll handle it from here, he said, closing the folder. How? Better if you don't know the details. No. Elena stood her ground. If I helped identify them, I need to know what happens next. I'm not going to hide behind ignorance. Damien's expression shifted, something like approval mixing with concern. We'll test them, set up false information, see who takes the bait. When we know for certain who it is, I'll confront them, give them a chance to explain. And if they can't explain? Then they've made their choice, and I'll make mine. Elena nodded, her throat tight. This was the line, the moment where she stopped being adjacent to the violence and became part of its logic. She could still walk it back, could say this was too much, could retreat to her greenhouse and her mother's letters and the comfortable fiction that she wasn't complicit. Instead, she said, when do we start? The trap was elegant in its simplicity. 3 different pieces of false information, each given to only one of the suspects. Whichever piece reached the Belmonts first would identify the leak. Damien set it in motion the next morning, and then they waited. The waiting was worse than the training. Elena threw herself into her physical conditioning, pushed herself harder than Marco thought wise, needed the exhaustion to quiet her mind. At night she lay awake wondering which of the three it would be, whether they had families, whether those families would blame Damien or themselves or the world that made such choices necessary. On the third day, Nico came to find her in the greenhouse. "We got confirmation," he said. "It's Vincent." Elena's hand stilled on the plant she'd been pruning. Vincent. The quiet man who managed their financial transfers, who'd been with Damien's father for 15 years, who had a daughter in college and a wife who volunteered at the children's hospital. "You're sure?" "The Belmonts moved on the false information we fed him. Nobody else's." Nico's expression was grim. "Damien's bringing him in tonight." "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing. Stay here. This part isn't... You don't need to see this." But Elena was already putting down the pruning shears, already heading for the door. "If I helped identify him, I see it through." "Elena, I see it through." Nico studied her, then nodded slowly. "Your call, but you can't unsee it once you're there." "I know." They brought Vincent to the estate at 8 o'clock. Elena watched from the security monitors as he arrived, looking confused but not yet afraid. Damien met him in the study, offered him a drink, sat him down like they were just having a conversation. Marco and Nico flanked the doors. Elena stood in the shadows, there but not participating, witnessing but not interfering. "We have a problem, Vincent," Damien said, his voice calm and cold. "Someone's been feeding information to the Belmonts. You know anything about that?" Vincent's face went pale. "No, of course not. I'd never—" "The shipment route you were briefed on Tuesday, the one through the Eastern District." Damien pulled out a tablet, showed him something Elena couldn't see from her angle. "The Belmonts hit it this morning. How did they know?" "I don't. Maybe someone overheard or—" "You were the only one briefed on that route. It was a test, Vincent. False information, given only to you." Damien's voice never rose, never wavered. "So I'll ask you again. Why are you feeding information to the Belmonts?" The silence stretched out, sharp enough to cut. Elena watched Vincent's face cycle through denial, panic, calculation, and finally resignation. "They have my daughter," he said, the words coming out broken. "They took her 3 weeks ago. Said if I didn't cooperate, they'd—" His voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But she's my daughter." The air went out of the room. Elena saw Damien's expression shift, saw the fury drain into something more complicated. Marco and Nico exchanged glances, and she could read the same conflict in their faces. Betrayal was betrayal, but this was different from greed or ambition. "Why didn't you come to me?" Damien asked, and for the first time Elena heard something like pain in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me they had her?" "Because I was afraid. Because I thought if I gave them what they wanted, they'd let her go. But they just kept asking for more." Vincent's hands shook. "I know what I've done. I know there's no coming back from this. Just please." "She doesn't know anything. She's innocent in this. Please." Damien stood, moved to the window, his back to the room. Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of the decision pressing down. In the silence, she understood the impossible calculation he was making: justice versus mercy, the rules of his world versus the love of a father for his child. Finally, he turned back. "Where is she? Where are they keeping your daughter?" Vincent gave them an address. Damien made 3 phone calls, speaking in the clipped code Elena had learned meant operations were moving. Then he looked at Vincent with something that might have been pity. "We'll get her back. Tonight. And then you're done. You and your family disappear. New city, new names, enough money to start over. But you never come back here. Never contact anyone from your old life. You're dead to this world. Understood?" Vincent's face crumpled. "Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Elena." Damien gestured toward the shadows where she stood. "She's the one who argued that context matters, that people make terrible choices for understandable reasons. If it was just me, you'd already be dead." Vincent turned to look at her, and Elena felt the weight of his gratitude and guilt and relief like something physical. She hadn't argued anything out loud, but somehow Damien had known, had seen her face while they were working through the evidence, had understood that she couldn't separate the betrayal from the desperation that caused it. "Get him out of here," Damien said to Marco. "Take him to the safe house. Don't let him contact anyone until we have his daughter." After they left, Damien and Elena stood alone in the study. The silence felt heavy, loaded with everything unsaid. "You went soft," she said finally. "I went human. There's a difference." He poured himself a drink, didn't offer her one. "In pure business terms, I should have killed him. Made an example. Shown everyone what happens when you betray me, regardless of reason. That's what my father would have done. But you're not your father." "No, for better or worse, I'm not." He downed the drink, set the glass down harder than necessary. "The Belmonts are going to see this as weakness. They took his daughter, he cracked, and I let him live anyway. That's going to cost me. Or it shows you're strong enough to make exceptions. That you're not ruled by fear." Elena moved closer, making him look at her. "You did the right thing." "The right thing isn't always the smart thing in this world." "Then maybe it's time to change what this world rewards." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You sound like my mother. She used to say things like that before the world proved her wrong." They recovered Vincent's daughter 4 hours later. The operation was clean, quick, no casualties on either side. The Belmonts had been using her as leverage, nothing more, and once Damien's people hit the safe house, the guards surrendered without a fight. By morning, Vincent and his family were on a plane to somewhere Damien wouldn't tell Elena, starting over with new identities and enough money to make it work. The Belmonts, predictably, were furious. They'd lost their leverage and their informant in one night. The retaliation came fast. Elena was in the library when the first explosion hit. The windows shattered inward, glass and sound and pressure all at once. She hit the floor on instinct, covering her head, her ears ringing. Somewhere in the house, alarms were screaming. Footsteps thundered through hallways. Someone was shouting, but she couldn't make out words through the noise in her head. Hands grabbed her, pulled her up. Damien, his face grim, a gun in his free hand. "Move," he said, and she moved. They ran through smoke and chaos, other figures joining them. Marco, Nico, guards whose names Elena didn't know. Another explosion, this one further away. The house shuddered. Damien dragged her through a doorway she'd never noticed, downstairs that descended into darkness. A bunker. Of course there was a bunker. The door sealed behind them with a heavy thunk, cutting off the noise from above. Emergency lights flickered on, showing a space about the size of her old apartment, lined with supplies and weapons and monitors showing the estate grounds. On the screens, Elena could see men moving through the smoke, armed, organized, clearly professional. The Belmonts had sent an army. "How many?" Marco asked, already checking weapons. 30, maybe 40, Nico said, watching the monitors. "They're spreading out, searching the house." "Let them search." Damien was calm, preternaturally so, already moving through what looked like a practiced routine. "The house is rigged. They want a war. We'll give them one." He pressed something on a control panel. On the monitors, sections of the estate erupted. Not explosions exactly, but gas, smoke, barriers dropping to redirect the invaders into kill zones. The Belmont's men scattered, regrouped, started falling back. "They're retreating," Marco said. "Not retreating, regrouping." Damien pointed to one of the screens. "There. That's Adrian Belmont. He's running the operation himself." Elena looked where he pointed, saw a man in his 50s directing his people with hand signals, professional and controlled even as his plan fell apart. This was the enemy, the one who'd been trying to kill her brother, who'd kidnapped Vincent's daughter, who'd just blown holes in their home. She should have hated him. Instead, she just felt tired. "What now?" she asked. "Now we wait. They'll either push forward or cut their losses. Either way, we respond." Damien finally looked at her, really looked, and she saw fear there for the first time since she'd known him. "Are you okay?" "I'm in a bunker because someone just bombed your house. I'm pretty far from okay." "But you're not hurt." "No, scared, but not hurt." Something eased in his expression. "Good. Stay scared. Scared keeps you smart." They waited in the bunker for 3 hours while Damien's security forces dealt with the Belmont's assault. Elena watched it all on monitors. Brief firefights, tactical retreats, the slow grinding down of the invading force until they finally withdrew completely, leaving behind 4 dead and accomplishing nothing except property damage. When they finally emerged, the house looked like a war zone. Windows blown out, walls scorched, The library where Elena had been reading completely destroyed. If Damien hadn't gotten to her when he did, she'd be dead. The thought made her knees weak. "This is my fault," she said as they surveyed the damage. "Vincent, the mercy. This is what it cost." "This is the Belmonts being desperate," Damien corrected. "They're losing ground, losing credibility. This was a panic move, and it failed." He kicked at some debris, his expression unreadable. "But you're right that it's connected. Every choice has consequences. That's the world we live in." Elena looked at her brother, covered in dust, exhausted, still holding a gun like it was part of his hand, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was what loving him meant. This violence, this constant threat, this life where peace was just the space between attacks. Her mother had been right to run from it, but Elena wasn't running. For better or worse, she was staying, because family meant standing in the wreckage together, meant sharing the weight even when it was too heavy, meant choosing each other over safety. "We rebuild," she said. Damien looked at her surprised. "What?" "The house, the security, whatever they broke. We rebuild it." She met his eyes. "That's what you do when someone tries to destroy what you've built. You rebuild stronger." Something like pride crossed his face. "You're sure you want to keep doing this? It's only going to get worse before it gets better." "I'm not sure of anything except that I'm not leaving." Elena picked up a piece of broken glass, turned it in her fingers, watching light catch the edges. "My mother spent her whole life running. I'm done running. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Damien nodded once, final and certain. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled her into a hug, brief and fierce, the kind that said things words couldn't. "Together," he agreed. Around them, the estate staff was already starting cleanup, already assessing damage, already moving forward, because that's what you did in this life. You survived, you adapted, you rebuilt. Elena had been learning that lesson for weeks now, but tonight it finally settled into her bones as truth. She was part of this world now. Part of the violence and the loyalty, the fear and the family. There was no going back to who she'd been before. And maybe that was okay. Maybe Sarah Cross had run because she was alone, but Elena had a brother who would burn the city down to keep her safe. That made all the difference. As they walked through the damaged house toward the parts still standing, Elena felt something shift inside her. Not acceptance exactly, but purpose. She couldn't change what Damien did or who he was, but maybe she could change what they built together. Maybe she could be the reason he made merciful choices instead of ruthless ones. Maybe that was enough. The thought carried her through the rest of that long night, through the cleanup and the planning and the quiet moments where fear tried to convince her she'd made the wrong choice. By dawn, when the estate was secure again and the Belmonts had retreated to lick their wounds, Elena stood at her window watching the sun rise over a world that would never be simple again. But it was hers, and she was done apologizing for claiming it. The reconstruction took 3 weeks. Contractors came and went under heavy security, replacing windows, repairing walls, upgrading systems that had proven vulnerable during the attack. Elena watched the house transform, watched Damien turn the assault into an opportunity to build something harder to break. Everything he did was like that, reactive but calculated, turning damage into advantage. She found him one morning in what used to be the library, now gutted down to studs and framework. He stood in the middle of the destruction holding blueprints, and when she entered, he didn't look up. "They want to make it exactly like it was before," he said. "I told them no. What's the point of rebuilding the same weakness?" Elena picked her way through the debris, stopped beside him. The blueprint showed a redesigned space, reinforced walls, bulletproof glass, hidden panels that probably concealed weapons or escape routes. "It won't be a library anymore. It'll be a library that can survive what this one couldn't. Everything else is nostalgia, and nostalgia gets you killed." He finally looked at her. "You disagree. I think there's value in keeping some things the way they were. Reminders of what you're protecting, not just what you're protecting it from." Spoken like someone who hasn't lost enough yet. The words stung, but Elena didn't back down. "I lost my mother. I lost my entire life the night I walked into your dinner. I know what loss feels like, Damien. I just don't think the answer is making everything around you into a fortress." He was quiet for a moment, studying the blueprints like they held answers to questions he wasn't asking. "What would you do?" If this was your choice? I'd reinforce what needs reinforcing, but I'd keep the heart of it the same. The books, the chairs, the feeling of the space. Otherwise, you're not protecting what you had. You're building something new and calling it preservation. Damien rolled up the blueprint slowly. I'll think about it. It was the closest he'd come to admitting she might be right, and Elena counted it as progress. The Belmonts went quiet after their failed assault, which Marco said was worse than if they'd kept attacking. Quiet means they're planning something bigger, waiting for the right moment to hit harder. Damien doubled the security, restricted movements off the estate, turned the house into exactly the fortress Elena had warned against. She watched him become more isolated, more consumed by the endless calculations of threat and response, and she hated seeing it happen even though she understood why. You need a break, she told him one evening. He was in his office going through surveillance footage, had been there for 6 hours straight. I need to find out what the Belmonts are planning. You need to sleep. Eat something that isn't coffee. Remember what it feels like to be human for 5 minutes. Being human is what gets you killed in this business. Elena walked around his desk, closed his laptop despite his protest, and met his exhausted glare with calm determination. Then I guess I'm trying to get you killed. Come on, the greenhouse, now. Elena, now. He came, probably because arguing took more energy than complying. They walked through the rebuilt sections of the house in silence, past guards who nodded at Damien and looked at Elena with something between respect and confusion. She'd become a fixture over the past month, someone who existed in that strange space between civilian and operative, family, but not quite part of the machine. The greenhouse was unchanged, the one part of the estate that hadn't needed rebuilding. Inside, the air wrapped around them like a living thing, warm and thick with the smell of earth and growing things. Elena went to the gardenias immediately. They'd become her responsibility, this thing she shared with a mother-in-law she'd never known and a brother who didn't know how to stop fighting long enough to grieve properly. These are dying, she said, touching brown-edged leaves. I know. I haven't had time to... Sit down. I'll handle it. Damien sat and Elena worked, pruning dead growth, adjusting soil pH, checking for pests. She'd learned all of this in the past month, learned it because Damien had taught her, and because keeping something alive felt important in a house that dealt so much in death. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between people who've stopped performing for each other. I had a thought, Elena said eventually, not looking up from her work, about what happens after. After what? After you neutralize the Belmont threat. After things stabilize. After you're not constantly fighting for survival. She set down the pruning shears, turned to face him. What do you actually want, Damien? Not what you have to do. What do you want? He looked at her like she'd asked him to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. That's not a question that matters in my position. It's the only question that matters. Because if you don't have an answer, then you're just maintaining an empire you inherited without knowing why. You're your father without even getting to choose it. My father chose this, built it deliberately, and died for it. Car accident, remember? Except you said it wasn't an accident, that someone got to him. So he built this empire, maintained it ruthlessly, and it killed him anyway. Is that the legacy you want? Or do you want something different? Damien stood, moved to the glass walls, looked out at the grounds he protected with walls and guns and constant vigilance. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was testing out words he'd never said aloud. I want to not have to kill people to keep what's mine. I want to walk into a restaurant without checking exits and scanning for threats. I want to sleep through the night without wondering if someone's planning my murder. He stopped, throat working. I want what my mother wanted before this life destroyed her. Something normal, something clean. Then make it happen. It's not that simple. Nothing about this is simple, but you're smart enough to find a way out if you actually wanted one. Elena moved to stand beside him. Or you stay in this cycle forever, fighting the same fights, making the same choices, until someone finally gets lucky and you end up like your father. Your call. He turned to look at her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her chest ache. You make it sound easy. I make it sound possible. There's a difference. She took his hand, the first time she'd initiated that kind of contact, and felt him tense before relaxing into it. I'm not saying burn it all down tomorrow. I'm saying think about what you're building toward instead of just defending what you have. There's a difference between those two things. And if I can't figure out what I'm building toward, then you fake it until you do. That's what I'm doing. That surprised a laugh out of him, short but genuine. You're faking it? Every single day. You think I know what I'm doing here? I'm a waitress who accidentally walked into a murder and somehow ended up with a criminal brother in combat training. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I show up anyway and pretend I have a plan until maybe one day I actually do. That's not reassuring. It's honest, which in this house of lies and calculated moves feels like the best I can offer. They stood there at the greenhouse while the world outside continued its rotation, guards patrolling, threats gathering, empires rising and falling on the backs of choices people made without ever knowing the full consequences. But in that moment, Elena felt like they'd both decided something without saying it explicitly. That survival wasn't enough anymore. That they wanted something better even if neither of them quite knew what that looked like yet. The peace lasted 3 more days. Elena was working in the new library. Damien had compromised, reinforced structure, but kept the soul when Marta found her. "There's someone here to see you," she said, and something in her tone made Elena's instincts prickle. "Who?" "She says she knew your mother." Elena's world tilted slightly. She followed Marta to one of the sitting rooms, where a woman in her 60s sat perched on the edge of a chair like she might need to run at any moment. She had sharp eyes and nervous hands, and when she saw Elena, she stood up so fast the chair scraped. "You look like her," the woman said. "Sarah. You look just like Sarah." "Who are you?" "Ruth Chen. I worked with your mother years ago, before you were born." Ruth's hands twisted together. "I need to talk to you about what happened back then, about why she ran." Elena's heart kicked into overdrive. "How did you find me?" "I've been watching, heard rumors about a girl connected to Damien Vale, thought maybe, but I wasn't sure until I saw you." Ruth glanced toward the door like she expected someone to burst through it. "Is he here, Damien?" "He's in the city." "What do you want, Ruth?" "To tell you the truth, the whole truth, not just the pieces your mother could bear to remember." Ruth sat back down, seemed to collapse into herself. "Sarah didn't just run from Damien's father. She ran because she found out what he really was. Not just a criminal, but the man who'd killed her brother." The room went cold. Elena sat down before her legs could give out. "What?" "Your uncle. Sarah's older brother, Michael. He got mixed up with the Vales 27 years ago. Owed them money he couldn't pay. Damien's father had him killed to make an example. Sarah didn't know. She'd already fallen for him by then. Was already pregnant with you. When she found out, when someone finally told her the truth, she ran. Had to. Because staying meant loving the man who'd murdered her family. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The letters, her mother's desperate fear, the way she'd built their life in hiding, it all crystallized into horrible clarity. "Does Damien know?" she managed. "I don't think so. This was before he was born, before he knew anything about the business. His father kept that side of things separate from family for years." Ruth leaned forward. "I'm telling you now because you deserve to know, and because I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of history repeating. Of you ending up like Sarah, trapped between love and truth, destroying yourself trying to reconcile the two." Ruth's eyes were wet. "Sarah was my best friend. Watching her choose survival over justice, watching her run and hide and die broke. It broke her. I don't want that for you." Elena heard herself asking questions about her uncle, about the circumstances, about whether her mother had ever considered revenge. Ruth answered everything she could, filled in gaps Elena hadn't known existed, painted a picture of Sarah Cross as someone more complicated than the tired, loving woman Elena remembered. By the time Ruth left, Elena felt like she'd been hollowed out and poorly reassembled. She sat alone in the sitting room trying to process what it meant, this new information that reframed everything she thought she understood. Damien's father had killed her uncle. Her mother had loved the man who destroyed her family, and Elena had just spent the last 2 months building a life with the son of her family's murderer. She was still sitting there when Damien came home. He found her in the dark. She hadn't bothered turning on lights as the sun set, and stopped in the doorway when he saw her face. "What happened?" Elena told him. All of it, every terrible detail Ruth had shared. She watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to something darker she couldn't quite name. "I didn't know," he said when she finished. "I swear to you, Elena, I never knew about this. I believe you, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change that your father killed my uncle and my mother loved him anyway, and it destroyed her." Elena's voice cracked. "We share blood, Damien, but our families destroyed each other before we ever existed. What does that make us?" "I don't know." He moved into the room, sat down across from her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked completely lost. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I'll make it right? I can't bring your uncle back. I can't undo what my father did." "I know you can't, but I need—" Elena stopped, not sure what she needed. Justice? Impossible. Revenge? Against a dead man? Understanding? Of what? They sat in silence while the darkness gathered around them, two people connected by blood and trauma, and choices made by ghosts, trying to figure out if any of that mattered against the relationship they'd actually built. "My mother ran," Elena said finally. "She found out the truth, and she ran, and it ate her alive for the rest of her life. She never forgave herself for loving him, never forgave herself for bringing me into existence as proof of that love. I grew up watching her hate herself for choices she made before I was born. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let something that happened before I existed dictate who I'm allowed to love now." She looked at him directly. "Your father killed my uncle. That's a fact. It's horrible, and it's unforgivable, and it's done. But you're not your father, and I'm not my mother, and we get to choose what we do with this information." "What are you choosing?" "I'm choosing not to run. I'm choosing to stay anyway because whatever complicated, twisted history created us doesn't define what we build going forward." Elena's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I'm choosing you, my brother, my family. Even knowing this." Damien's face did something complicated, cycling through relief and guilt, and something that might have been grief. "You shouldn't. You should hate me for this. Why? Because of blood? Because your father's crime should automatically become yours?" She shook her head. "That's the logic of this world, Damien. The logic that says children pay for their parents' sins. But I'm done with that logic. It didn't work for my mother, and it won't work for me. So what now? Now we keep building what we started. But we do it honestly, knowing the whole truth. No more hidden letters, no more secrets that explode later. We face this together." He nodded slowly, and Elena saw the decision settle over him like a weight he was choosing to carry. Together. The word felt significant, loaded with all the history they couldn't escape and the future they were trying to create anyway. Elena stood, suddenly exhausted, and Damien stood with her. "For what it's worth," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. For what my father did. For what it cost your family. For all of it." "I know. And for what it's worth, I don't blame you." She moved toward the door, paused. "But we need to do something about this. About the pattern. Your father killed to make examples. You've killed to maintain power. At some point, someone has to break the cycle. Is that what you want? For me to break the cycle? I want you to want to break it. There's a difference." She left him there in the dark and went to her room and pulled out her mother's letters one more time. Reading them now with Ruth's revelations, she could see the coded pain, the guilt threaded through every line. Sarah Cross had loved a man who'd destroyed her family, and it had poisoned everything that came after. She'd run from it, but never escaped it, had carried that knowledge like a curse until cancer provided a different kind of ending. Elena refused that fate, refused to let her father's crimes or her mother's grief dictate the shape of her life. She was building something new with Damien, something that acknowledged the past but wasn't enslaved to it. Whether that made her naive or revolutionary, she couldn't say, but it felt right in a way nothing else had since her life imploded. The next morning, Damien called her to his office. "I've been thinking about what you said, about breaking cycles." He looked like he hadn't slept, but there was something different in his expression, determination maybe, or the beginning of hope. "I want to show you something." He pulled up files on his computer, financial records that meant nothing to Elena until he explained them. Accounts set up in shell companies, money being quietly redirected from the criminal enterprises toward legitimate investments, plans for slowly transitioning the empire from gray market operations to legal business ventures. "I started this 6 months ago," he said. after my father died and I realized I didn't want to die the same way. It's slow. Will take years, maybe a decade. But the goal is to phase out everything questionable and build something that can survive in daylight. Elena stared at the spreadsheets, the careful planning, the evidence that Damien had been trying to change long before she showed up. Why didn't you tell me? Because it might not work. Because every family that's tried this before got torn apart in the transition, either by rivals who saw weakness or by their own people who didn't want to go legitimate. Because I didn't want you to think this was possible if it wasn't. He met her eyes. But after yesterday, after everything, I want you to know I'm trying. That I'm not just maintaining what my father built. I'm trying to transform it into something different. Does Marco know? Nico? They know. They're helping. It's why we've been so careful about security lately. We're vulnerable during the transition. The Belmonts sense it, which is why they're pushing hard now. They want to take us down before we can complete the shift. Elena absorbed this, reframing everything she'd seen over the past 2 months through this new lens. The careful management of territory, the mercy shown to Vincent, the way Damien navigated conflicts looking for solutions that didn't end in blood. He'd been trying to change the whole time, just quietly, without announcing it to a world that would punish the attempt. I want to help, she said. You are helping. Every time you push me to be better than my instincts, every time you remind me there's a world outside this fortress, you're helping. No, I mean practically. What can I do to make this transition work? Damien leaned back, considering her. There is something. A project I've been thinking about but haven't had bandwidth to develop. Using some of the transition money to fund legitimate community programs. Youth centers, job training, resources for people trying to get out of the life. It would serve 2 purposes. Good PR for our legitimate businesses, and a genuine way to give back to communities we've extracted from for decades. You want me to run it? I want you to build it. Design it from the ground up. Make it actually useful instead of just performative charity. You know what it's like to struggle, to need help and not have access to it. Use that knowledge. Make something real. Elena felt something ignite in her chest, purpose crystallizing into actual direction. This was it. The answer to what she was building toward. Not just survival in Damien's world, but transformation of it. Taking the resources generated by crime and redirecting them toward healing the damage crime created. When do I start? Now, if you want, I'll get you everything you need. Funding, legal support, contacts. The only condition is you do it right. No half measures, no cutting corners. If we're going to change things, we change them completely. Deal. They shook on it, formal and slightly ridiculous given they were siblings, but it felt important to mark the moment. Elena was taking ownership of something, stepping into a role that was hers alone rather than just orbiting Damien's world. She spent the next 2 weeks buried in research and planning. Talked to community organizers, social workers, people who actually understood the needs she was trying to address. Learned quickly that good intentions without practical knowledge caused more harm than help, and adjusted her approach accordingly. Built a team, found office space outside the estate, started the slow work of turning money into meaningful programs. Damien watched from a distance, offering resources when she asked, but otherwise letting her build it herself. He understood instinctively that she needed this to be hers, not his project filtered through her execution. The distinction mattered more than Elena had expected. Marco and Nico were less convinced. You're putting her out there, Marco said one night when Elena was working late at the new office. She could hear them through the door Damien had left half open, probably deliberately. Making her visible. That's dangerous. She's already visible. The Belmonts know she exists. Hiding her doesn't change that. Damien's voice was patient, final. Let her build something good. We owe the world that much. We don't owe the world anything. We take what we can and protect what's ours. That's how we survive. That's how we survived. But Elena's right. At some point, someone has to break the cycle. Might as well be us. The conversation moved on, but Elena sat in her office feeling the weight of what Damien had just done. Defended her project not as indulgence, but as strategy. Committed to the change she'd pushed him toward. Chosen transformation over the endless maintenance of violence. It felt like progress. Fragile, uncertain, but real. The foundation launched quietly 8 weeks after the Belmont assault. No press, no announcement, just doors opening to people who needed help. Elena worked 16-hour days getting it running, learning on the job how to manage staff and budgets, and the thousand small crises that came with trying to help people whose problems were bigger than any program could solve. But it was working. Slowly, imperfectly, but working. Damien visited one afternoon, toured the facility without fanfare, talked to some of the people whose lives were being changed by resources that had come from criminal enterprise and been laundered into something legitimate. When they were alone in Elena's office afterward, he looked at her with something like pride. "My mother would have loved this," he said. "She always wanted to build something good, never got the chance. Then we're building it for her. And for my mother. For everyone who got destroyed by the world we inherited." Elena gestured toward the window, toward the people moving through the facility below. "This doesn't erase what your father did, or what you've done, but it's a start toward something different. Is it enough? I don't know, but it's more than nothing, which is what we had before." He nodded, seemed about to say something else, but then his phone rang. His expression changed as he answered, went through neutral into dangerous territory. "When?" he asked. Then, "How many?" And finally, "I'm on my way." He hung up, looked at Elena with an expression she'd learned to read as trouble incoming. "The Belmonts hit 3 of our operations simultaneously. They're escalating, trying to force a final confrontation." He moved toward the door, already shifting into crisis mode. "I need you to stay here. Lock down. Don't leave until I send someone for you." "Damien, please. I can't focus on what I need to do if I'm worried about you." Elena wanted to argue, to insist on being part of whatever came next, but she saw the fear beneath his controlled exterior and understood. This was different from the previous attacks. This was the Belmonts making their final move, win or die trying. "Be careful," she said instead. "Always am." He left, and Elena locked the foundation doors, sent her staff home early, and waited in her office while her brother went to war. The hours stretched out, each minute feeling like 10, her phone silent because Damien wouldn't risk communications that could be intercepted. By midnight, she'd worn a path in the carpet pacing. By 2 in the morning, she'd convinced herself something terrible had happened. By 3, she was ready to break lockdown and drive to the estate herself. That's when Damien walked through the door. He was alive, but barely looked it. Blood on his clothes, exhaustion carved into his face, moving like every step hurt. Elena rushed to him, checking for injuries the way he'd taught her, and found a knife wound in his side that he'd clearly been ignoring. "Hospital. Now." "Can't. Too many questions." He let her guide him to the couch, hissing as he sat. "Got a first aid kit?" She did. Had learned to keep one after the night of the assault. She cleaned the wound as gently as she could while Damien gritted his teeth and looked anywhere but at what she was doing. "What happened?" she asked. "We won. Barely. The Belmonts are finished. Adrian's dead. His lieutenants scattered. Our territory's secure." He paused. "For now." "And the cost?" "3 of ours dead. 2 more in critical condition. Property damage we'll be repairing for months." His voice was hollow, scraped clean of emotion. "But we survived. That's what matters." Elena finished the bandaging in silence, her hand steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. When she was done, Damien caught her wrist, held it gently. "Thank you for being here, for building something worth protecting." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much tonight. "I meant what I said before. We're breaking the cycle, no matter how many times the world tries to drag us back into it. I'm holding you to that." "I know. That's why I said it." They sat together in the quiet office while the city outside continued its rotation, oblivious to the small war that had just concluded in its shadows. Elena thought about cycles and choices, about the distance between who they were and who they were trying to become. The gap felt enormous, unbridgeable sometimes. But they were trying. That had to count for something. When Damien finally stood to leave, moving carefully around the knife wound, Elena walked him to the car. Marco was driving, looking nearly as rough as Damien, and he nodded at Elena with something approaching respect. "You did good with this place," he said, gesturing toward the foundation. "Damien talks about it constantly. Drives Nico crazy." "Good. Nico needs to be driven crazy occasionally." Marco grinned, tired but genuine. "You're all right, Elena Cross. Your mother would be proud." The words hit her harder than expected, and she had to look away before her eyes could water. When she looked back, Damien was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start rebuilding, again. Always rebuilding, never quite finished. That's life in this world. You build. Something breaks it. You build again stronger." He paused at the car door. "But at least now we're building towards something instead of just defending against everything. That's progress." "That's hope," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." "Then I guess we're hopeful." How terrifying. He got in the car and Marco drove them away into the pre-dawn darkness, and Elena stood in the empty parking lot feeling the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they still had to overcome. The Belmonts were finished, but there would be others. There were always others in a world that rewarded violence and punished mercy. But Elena had learned something in these months of transformation. The change happened slowly, one choice at a time, one moment of choosing different over easy. Damien was trying to break his family's pattern. She was trying to build something good from blood money. Neither of them knew if it would work, but they were trying together, and that felt revolutionary in a world that said people like them couldn't change, shouldn't try, would always fail. Elena locked up the foundation, drove back to the estate through empty streets, and fell into bed as the sun rose over a city that looked peaceful if you didn't know what had happened in its shadows overnight. She dreamed of her mother, of Sarah Cross making the choices that led to Elena's existence. And when she woke hours later, she felt something like forgiveness settling over her. Her mother had run from an impossible situation because she had no support, no alternative, no brother to stand beside her and share the weight. Elena had all of those things. It made all the difference. The cycle was breaking, slowly but certainly, and Elena intended to make sure it stayed broken, no matter what that required. 6 months after the Belmont War ended, Elena stood in the Foundation's main hall watching teenagers filter in for the evening programs and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, pride that didn't come tangled with guilt or fear. The space hummed with life now, voices echoing off walls that held classes and counseling sessions and job training workshops. Real help for real people, funded by money that had come from terrible places but was being transformed into something clean. Transforming dirty money into hope didn't erase where it came from. Elena understood that. But it was more than these kids would have had otherwise, and she'd learned to live with complicated truths. "You're doing that thing again," Marco said, appearing beside her with coffee he'd brought from the place down the street that knew everyone's order by now. "The staring into space like you're solving world hunger." "Just thinking about how far we've come. We've come pretty damn far. From you being a hostage to you running the most successful community program in this part of the city." He handed her the coffee. "Damien's proud, you know. Won't say it directly because he's emotionally constipated, but he is." Elena smiled despite herself. "How's he doing with the transition? Really?" "Slowly. 3 more operations went legitimate last month. Still have some holdouts, people who don't want to change, think going legal makes us weak, but we're getting there." Marco's expression turned serious. "It's dangerous, though. Every step toward legitimate business makes us vulnerable to the families who stayed criminal. They see opportunity in our vulnerability." "Is Damien worried?" "Damien's always worried, but he's committed. Says if we're going to do this, we do it all the way. No half measures." Marco paused. "He's different since you showed up. Softer in some ways, harder in others. Like he finally has something worth protecting beyond just power." Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and watched her students settle into their classes. These were kids from neighborhoods where opportunities disappeared before you were old enough to recognize them, where the criminal life looked like the only viable path because legitimate options required resources no one had. The Foundation was trying to change that equation, one person at a time. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough to undo all the damage. But it was something. That night, Damien called her to the estate for dinner. It had become a weekly ritual, this forced domesticity between siblings who were still learning how to be family. Marta cooked, Marco and Nico showed up and argued about everything. And for a few hours they could pretend they were normal people living normal lives. Except tonight felt different. Elena sensed it the moment she walked in. Tension in the air, careful expressions, the way everyone kept glancing at Damien like they were waiting for him to detonate. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her bag. "Nothing's wrong exactly." Damien gestured toward the dining room. "Let's eat first, then we'll talk." That didn't sound ominous at all. Dinner was strained, conversation forced, and by the time Marta cleared the plates, Elena's nerves were screaming. When Damien finally led her to his office, she was almost relieved to face whatever crisis was brewing. He closed the door, poured himself a drink he didn't touch, and stood by the window looking out at the grounds he'd fortified against a world that kept trying to destroy him. "The Castellanos made contact," he said finally. "They want a meeting." Elena's stomach dropped. The Castellanos were the biggest family in the region, the ones who'd stayed carefully neutral during the Belmont conflict, watching to see who'd come out on top. They dealt in everything the law prohibited and some things it hadn't thought to ban yet. Damien had been avoiding direct contact with them for months, knowing any alliance would come with strings that could strangle. What do they want? Territory. They're expanding, pushing into areas we've traditionally controlled. They want to negotiate a split before things get violent. He finally turned to face her. "But there's a complication." "What kind of complication?" "They want to meet you, specifically you." Rafael Castellano heard about the Foundation, about what we're doing with the transition, and he's curious. Damien's expression was unreadable. "He's also heard that you're my sister. That makes you leverage, or an asset, depending on how the meeting goes." "You think it's a trap?" "I think everything is potentially a trap until proven otherwise. But refusing the meeting sends the message that we're afraid, and fear is weakness in this world." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "I won't force you to go. If you say no, I'll find another way to handle this. But if you do go, if you meet Rafael and show him what we're building, it could help. Could convince him that our transition is real, that there's a future in following our lead instead of fighting us for scraps. Or it could get me kidnapped and used against you. That's also possible, which is why I need you to decide if the risk is worth it." Elena thought about her mother, who'd spent her whole life running from risks like these. Thought about the kids at the Foundation who deserved a world where criminal empires didn't dictate their futures. Thought about Damien, trying to transform his inheritance into something that wouldn't destroy him the way it had destroyed his father. "When's the meeting?" 3 days. Neutral location, full security protocols. I'll be there the whole time." "Then I'm going. But on one condition." "What?" "I don't just meet Rafael, I pitch him on the Foundation model. On the idea that transitioning to legitimate business is better long-term than staying criminal. I try to convince him to follow our lead." She met Damien's eyes. "If we're doing this, we do it all the way." Something like pride crossed his face. "You sound like me. I learned from the best." "That's debatable. But all right. 3 days. We present a unified front, family and business, transformation and strength. Either he respects it or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, then we deal with that when it comes." The 3 days felt like 3 hours. Elena prepared obsessively, building her pitch, practicing answers to hostile questions, learning everything she could about Rafael Castellano and his organization. Marco drilled her on security protocols while Nico taught her how to read the room for threats. Damien mostly watched, offering small corrections, trusting her to figure it out. The night before the meeting, Elena found him in the greenhouse again. He was repotting gardenias, the same careful movement she'd learned from him months ago, and he didn't look up when she entered. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "Haven't slept well in years. You get used to it." He set down the pot, brushed dirt from his hands. "You're nervous about tomorrow." "Terrified, but also weirdly excited. Is that normal? In this life?" "Yes." The line between terror and excitement gets real thin when the stakes are high. He looked at her then, really looked. "You've changed since you got here, gotten harder in some ways, stronger in others." "Is that good?" "I don't know. You're not the frightened waitress who stumbled into my dinner anymore. But I'm not sure what you've become instead." Elena considered that. "I'm someone who's tired of being afraid. Someone who wants to build something better even if the world says it's impossible. Someone who found family in the worst possible circumstances and decided that mattered more than logic." She moved to stand beside him. "I'm your sister. That's what I've become." Damien's throat worked. "My father would have liked you. Would have seen himself in you. The stubbornness, the refusal to quit even when quitting makes sense. Would he have approved of what we're trying to do? No, he believed power was the only thing that mattered, that going legitimate was betraying everything he'd built." Damien picked up another pot, started working again. "But he's dead. And I'm alive, and that means I get to decide what his legacy becomes. We get to decide. They worked in silence after that, tending to flowers his mother had loved and Elena had learned to nurture. And in the quiet, Elena felt something settle into certainty. Tomorrow would be dangerous. Rafael Castellano could decide they were weak and move against them. Or he could see the possibility in what they were building and choose alliance over conflict. Either way, she'd face it standing beside her brother. That felt like enough. The meeting was set in a restaurant that reminded Elena viscerally of Corvo's, where this all started. Different name, same expensive elegance, same private sections reserved for people who did business the world wasn't supposed to see. She walked in beside Damien, flanked by Marco and Nico, and tried to channel confidence she didn't entirely feel. Rafael Castellano was already seated when they arrived. A man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. Two bodyguards stood behind him, professional and alert. And when Rafael stood to greet them, his smile was pleasant and completely untrustworthy. Damien Vale. Finally we meet properly. His eyes shifted to Elena. And this must be the famous sister, Elena, yes? I've heard interesting things about your work, Mr. Castellano. Elena shook his hand, felt him assess her in that handshake. Strength, confidence, whether she was a player or a pawn. She met his eyes steadily, didn't look away first. Please sit. We have much to discuss. They sat, ordered drinks for appearances, though Elena had no intention of consuming anything she didn't watch being poured. The opening conversation was carefully neutral: business conditions, territorial boundaries, the disruption caused by the Belmont War's conclusion. Rafael spoke like someone used to being listened to, and Damien responded with the same controlled authority. Elena waited, watching for the moment to make her pitch. It came when Rafael turned to her directly. Your brother tells me you run a foundation, community programs, job training, youth services, funded by his organization. That's right. Interesting approach. Most families in our position extract from communities. You're putting resources back. Why? Because extraction isn't sustainable. You can only take so much before communities collapse. And then where do you operate? What do you control? Elena leaned forward slightly. The foundation isn't charity, it's investment. We're building goodwill, creating legitimate business opportunities, giving people alternatives to the criminal pipeline. Long term, that makes us more stable, not less. And in the short term? In the short term, it costs money and makes us look soft to people who only understand force. But we're willing to accept those costs because we're building toward something different. Rafael's expression was unreadable. Different how? Legal, legitimate. An empire that can survive in daylight instead of just shadows. She glanced at Damien, who nodded almost imperceptibly. My brother is transitioning everything we do toward legitimate business. Slowly, carefully, but completely. The foundation is part of that. Proof that we're serious about change, not just rebranding the same operations. And you think I should follow this model? Abandon profitable criminal enterprises to chase legitimacy? I think you should consider whether the world is changing faster than criminal organizations can adapt. Law enforcement is better funded, better coordinated. Federal attention is harder to avoid. Public tolerance for organized crime is shrinking. Elena held his gaze. The families that survive the next decade will be the ones who evolve. The ones who stay the same will get destroyed by their own inflexibility. The table went quiet. Rafael studied her with new intensity, and Elena felt the weight of his calculation, whether she was naive or visionary, whether her argument held merit or was just idealistic noise. Then he smiled, and it was somehow more dangerous than his neutrality had been. You make a compelling case, Miss Cross. Though I notice you're trying to convince me while your brother says nothing. Is this his position or just yours? It's ours, Damien said, his voice carrying quiet authority. Elena articulates it better than I do, but we're aligned. The criminal empire my father built is dying. I can either die with it or transform it into something that survives. I'm choosing survival. And if I choose differently, if I see your transition as weakness and move on your territory, then we defend what's ours. Make no mistake, Rafael, going legitimate doesn't mean going soft. We still have teeth. We just prefer not to use them unnecessarily. The tension stretched out, sharp and present, and Elena felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. This could go either way. Alliance or war, cooperation or conflict. Raphael leaned back, took a slow sip of his drink, and when he spoke, his voice had shifted into something almost approving. I like you both. You have vision, courage, the willingness to make hard choices. That's rare in our world. He set down his glass. Here's what I propose. A trial period. 6 months where we maintain current boundaries, no territorial disputes, while I observe your transition. If you can prove the model works, that you can go legitimate without losing power, then we talk seriously about alliance, maybe even about following your lead. But if you fail, if the transition makes you vulnerable and other families move in, then our agreement ends and I take what opportunities arise. Fair? It was more than Elena had hoped for, and less than they needed. 6 months to prove the impossible, while staying strong enough to not be destroyed in the attempt. But it was better than immediate war. She looked at Damien, saw him running the same calculations, weighing the risks against the alternatives. Fair, Damien said finally. 6 months. We'll show you what's possible. They shook on it, and the meeting shifted into logistics and boundaries and all the practical details that turned theoretical agreements into actual policy. Elena participated when asked, mostly observed, and by the time they left 2 hours later, she felt exhausted and wired simultaneously. In the car heading back to the estate, Marco was the first to speak. That went better than expected, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Nico was tense, watching traffic like every car might contain threats. 6 months isn't long to prove a complete transformation, and if we stumble, Raphael will be all over us. Then we don't stumble. Damien's voice was final, certain. He looked at Elena. You did well in there. Better than well. Raphael respected you, which is rare. He usually dismisses anyone who isn't a direct threat. I just told him the truth. The truth delivered well is more powerful than lies delivered perfectly. You understand that instinctively. He was quiet for a moment. We're going to make this work, Elena. The transition, the foundation, all of it. We have to. Because Raphael is watching? Because you convinced me it's possible, and I don't want to let you down. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard, made her chest ache. Her brother, this complicated man who'd killed to protect what was his and was now trying to build something better than violence, was trying for her. Because she'd shown up in his life and refused to accept that people couldn't change. You won't, she said. We're doing this together, remember? Together, right. The 6 months that followed were the hardest of Elena's life. She threw everything into the foundation, expanding programs, securing partnerships with legitimate businesses, building a model that could be replicated by other families if they wanted to follow Damien's lead. Every success felt fragile, every setback catastrophic. Raphael's people watched everything, evaluating, and the pressure was constant. Meanwhile, Damien worked the business transformation with ruthless efficiency. More operations going legitimate. More territory secured through business deals instead of violence. The slow, grinding work of changing an empire's fundamental nature while staying strong enough that no one could exploit the transition. They had setbacks. 2 of Damien's key people quit rather than go legitimate, took positions with rival families. A shipment got intercepted because someone talked. A legitimate business venture failed spectacularly, costing them money and credibility. But they had victories too. A major contract with a construction firm that gave them legitimate revenue. The Foundation's job training program placing 80% of graduates into real employment. Raphael himself visiting the Foundation, seeing the work firsthand, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than just surveillance. 4 months into the trial period, Elena was working late at the Foundation when Damien showed up unannounced. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. They drove into the city, through neighborhoods Elena recognized from her old life. The parts of town where she'd struggled and survived before accidentally walking into Damien's world. He pulled up outside a building that had been abandoned for years, now showing signs of renovation. What is this? Elena asked. The next phase. If the Foundation model works, and it is working, we replicate it. 5 more locations across the city, each serving different communities. More programs, more reach, more impact. He handed her a folder with architectural plans and budgets. I'm putting you in charge of the expansion, all of it. Elena stared at the plans, feeling the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just supporting her project anymore. This was making community transformation central to their entire operation, making her vision core to the Empire's new identity. "This is a lot of money," she said. "A lot of risk. It's also the right thing to do. And it shows Raphael we're serious. That this isn't a temporary performance for his benefit. It's who we're becoming." Damien looked at her in the dim light of the car. "You changed me, Elena. Showed me there was another way to live that didn't end in violence and early graves. This is me trying to deserve that chance you gave me. I didn't give you anything. You chose this yourself. You made the choice seem possible. There's a difference." He squeezed her shoulder briefly, awkward with affection but genuine. "Build it. Make it undeniable. Show the world that people like us can actually change." Elena built it. Worked 18-hour days for the next 2 months, assembled teams, secured locations, launched programs that expanded the Foundation's reach exponentially. The work was overwhelming and exhilarating, and she'd never felt more purposeful in her life. When the 6-month deadline arrived, Rafael Castellano came to the Foundation's flagship location for a final evaluation. He toured every facility, talked to staff and program participants, reviewed outcomes and financial projections. Damien and Elena presented the full scope of the transformation. Criminal operations phased out, legitimate businesses thriving, community programs creating genuine change. Raphael listened to all of it, asked pointed questions, poked at weak spots in their model. By the time he finished, Elena's nerves were shredded. They stood in her office, the three of them, while Raphael considered his verdict. "I came here expecting to find a performance," he said finally. "Window dressing on the same criminal operations, just with better PR. But this is real. You've actually done it, transformed a criminal empire into something that could survive scrutiny. It's impressive. Does that mean you're interested in Alliance?" Damien asked. "It means I'm interested in learning and seeing if this model works long-term, not just for 6 months when someone's watching." Raphael's expression shifted into something almost respectful. "You've earned a real partnership, not just a ceasefire. We maintain our territories, share intelligence about threats, and I start exploring legitimacy for my own operations. Carefully, with your guidance. If anyone can make this work, it's you two." They formalized the agreement that night, and when Raphael left, Elena finally let herself breathe. "We did it," she said. "You did it," Damien corrected. "I just followed your lead." "That's not true and you know it." "Maybe. But you were the catalyst. The reason any of this became possible." He moved to the window, looked out at a city they were slowly transforming through pure, stubborn refusal to accept that change was impossible. "My father's empire is dead. What we're building in its place is ours, yours and mine. Something that won't destroy us the way the old world destroyed him and your mother." Elena joined him out the window, and they stood there in silence while the Foundation hummed with life below them. Proof that transformation was real even when everyone said it couldn't be. 3 months later, the Foundation held its first major public event, a fundraising gala to support expansion into 2 more cities. Elena had resisted the idea initially, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but Damien insisted it was important, showing the world what they'd built, making it too visible to destroy quietly. The night of the gala, Elena stood in front of her mirror trying to recognize herself. She wore a dress that cost more than her old monthly rent, her hair professionally styled, makeup applied by someone who did this for a living. She looked sophisticated, powerful, nothing like the frightened waitress who'd stumbled into a murder scene months ago. That woman was gone. Elena had become someone new in the crucible of Damien's world, someone who could navigate dangerous conversations, build transformative programs, stand beside her brother as an equal rather than just someone he protected. The transformation felt both natural and impossible. "You ready?" Damien asked, appearing in her doorway wearing a tuxedo that made him look dangerously elegant. "The guests are arriving." "As ready as I'll ever be." They descended the grand staircase of the estate together, and Elena felt the weight of eyes on them. Donors, community leaders, politicians who'd started paying attention now that the Foundation was making real impact. She'd learned to tolerate scrutiny without flinching, another skill from her education in Damien's world. The gala was perfect in that careful, controlled way that came from Marta's planning and Damien's insistence on excellence. Elena worked the room with practiced ease now, talking about programs and outcomes, thanking donors, building relationships that would support the foundation's continued growth. This was her world now, and she'd learned to move through it with confidence. Midway through the evening, Rafael Castellano arrived with his wife, making a very public statement about their alliance. He'd brought a substantial donation check and genuine enthusiasm for the foundation's model, which he was slowly implementing in his own territory. Other families were watching, Rafael said, considering whether transformation was possible for them too. The ripple effect Elena had hoped for was actually happening. As the evening wound down and guests filtered into the gardens for the final reception, Damien found Elena standing alone on a terrace overlooking the grounds. "Successful night," he said, handing her champagne she hadn't asked for but accepted anyway. "You look natural in there, like you were born to this." "I wasn't born to this. I learned it. There's a difference." "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment, then said something that made Elena's breath catch. "I want to do something, and I need your permission first." "What kind of something?" "I want to name the foundation after our mothers, the Sarah and Catherine Crossvale Foundation, for women rebuilding their lives." He looked at her carefully. "Your mother and mine both got destroyed by this world in different ways. Seems right to honor them by building something that helps others escape that fate." Elena's throat went tight. "You're sure? Your mother married into the family. Mine ran from it. They both deserve better than they got. This way they get a legacy that isn't just pain and secrets." His voice roughened slightly. "What do you think? Would your mother have wanted that?" Elena thought about Sarah Cross, who'd spent her life running from the man she'd loved and the brother she'd lost, who'd died broke and tired but had still managed to raise a daughter who believed transformation was possible. "I think she'd be honored and surprised, but mostly honored." "Then it's settled. We announce it next month, make it official." They stood together on the terrace while music drifted from the gala below and the city spread out beyond the estate walls, and Elena felt the strange satisfaction of having built something real from impossible circumstances. The foundation would carry her mother's name now, would honor both their mothers by being what neither woman had access to, a way out, a second chance, proof that the world could be different. 6 months after the gala, Elena stood in her office at the foundation's newest location, reviewing applications for their expanded programming. The work had become her life in the best way, exhausting and meaningful, proof that change could be measured in lives improved and opportunities created. Damien's transformation was complete now, at least the major phase. 90% of his operations were legitimate. The remaining 10% was being carefully phased out, complicated by logistics but happening steadily. Other families had started following his model, slowly, cautiously, testing whether legitimacy could coexist with power. The world hadn't become perfect. Violence still erupted sometimes when negotiations failed. People still got hurt. But the trajectory had changed from inevitable destruction toward possible sustainability, and that felt revolutionary. Marco found her that afternoon with news. "Damien wants you at the estate tonight, says it's important." "What kind of important?" "The good kind, I think, but he wouldn't tell me details." Marco grinned. "Wear something nice. It's apparently formal." Elena arrived at the estate that evening to find it transformed. Lights strung through the gardens, tables set up on the lawn, familiar faces gathered in celebration. She found Damien in the greenhouse, of course the greenhouse, tending to gardenias that were thriving now under their careful attention. "What's all this?" she asked. He turned and she saw something in his expression she'd rarely seen, uncomplicated happiness. "It's been a year. Since the gala, since we formalized the foundation's expansion, since we proved transformation was actually possible. I wanted to mark that, celebrate the people who made it happen." "This is too much." "It's exactly enough." He guided her back toward the gardens where the party was gathering. Marco and Nico put it together, insisted we needed to acknowledge the milestone. They're getting soft in their old age. They're 35. Like I said, old age. The party was perfect, casual but elegant, intimate despite the crowd. Exactly the kind of celebration that happened when you let people who actually cared plan something instead of hiring it out. Elena moved through it feeling overwhelmed by gratitude, by the community they'd built not just in the foundation, but here in Damien's world. As the evening settled into comfortable warmth, Damien called for attention. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward him with the automatic deference he commanded even in casual settings. "I'm not good at speeches," he started, which got knowing laughs from people who'd heard him negotiate multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. "But I wanted to say something tonight about what we've accomplished. A year ago, we were a criminal organization trying to convince ourselves and everyone else that we could change, that we could become something better than what we inherited. Most people said it was impossible, said families like ours don't transform. We just rebrand the same operations under new names." He paused, looked directly at Elena. "My sister said we were wrong about that, said change was possible if we committed completely, if we were willing to do the actual work instead of just performing legitimacy for appearances. She built the foundation that proved it could be done, created a model other families are now following, changed the trajectory of an entire criminal enterprise through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that we couldn't be better." Elena felt her face heat as applause rippled through the crowd. So this party isn't just celebrating a year of success. It's celebrating the person who made that success possible, who changed me, changed us, changed what we thought was achievable. Damien raised his glass. To Elena Cross, for being brave enough to stay when running made more sense, and stubborn enough to build something beautiful from very ugly circumstances. The toast echoed through the garden, and Elena had to blink back tears she hadn't expected. When Damien made his way to her through the crowd, she grabbed his arm. "You didn't have to do that." "I did, actually. You needed to hear it. You changed everything, Elena. Time you got acknowledged for that." Later, when the party had dispersed into smaller conversations and quieter celebrations, Elena found herself alone in the greenhouse again. The space had become sacred somehow. Where Damien had first shown her gentleness existed beneath his dangerous exterior, where they'd processed revelations about their parents, where they came when the world outside got too heavy. She was examining new growth on the gardenias when footsteps behind her announced company. She turned expecting Damien and found Marta instead, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might want this," Marta said, offering one. "Thanks. Great party." Damien wanted it perfect. Spent 3 days arguing with Marco about details. Marta smiled. "He's different with you around. Lighter, somehow. More human." "He was always human, just hiding it under layers of necessary armor." "Maybe. But you showed him the armor wasn't as necessary as he thought. That's a gift." Marta sipped her wine, thoughtful. "I worked for his father for 23 years. Watched that man destroy himself and everyone around him chasing power he didn't know how to use for anything except accumulation. Damien was headed down the same path before you arrived. Now he's building something that might actually last. We're building it together. You're being modest, but all right, together." Marta set down her glass. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving him a reason to be better, for showing him family could mean more than just business alliances. His mother would have loved you." She left before Elena could respond, and Elena stood alone in the greenhouse feeling the weight of everything they'd accomplished and everything still ahead. The work wasn't done, would probably never be fully done. There would always be threats, always families who chose violence over transformation, always setbacks that made progress feel impossible. But they'd proved change was real, that criminal empires could evolve into something legitimate, that people could rewrite their own stories if they committed completely. That felt like enough for tonight. The months that followed brought new challenges and new growth. The foundation expanded into 4 more cities. Damien finalized the transition out of criminal operations entirely, became the head of a legitimate business empire built on the bones of what his father had created. Rafael Castellano followed their model successfully, and word spread through the underground that transformation was possible for families willing to commit. Elena's life took shape around purpose instead of survival. She dated occasionally, briefly, but nothing stuck. Hard to explain to normal people that your brother was a former crime boss, and your work was funded by laundered money being redirected toward good. She told herself she didn't mind, that the foundation and the family she'd built with Damien were enough. Most days she believed it. 2 years after that first gala, Elena received a call from Ruth Chen, her mother's old friend who'd revealed the truth about Sarah's brother. They'd stayed in sporadic contact, Ruth checking in occasionally to see how Elena was handling the weight of her inheritance. "I have something for you," Ruth said. "Letters from your mother. She wrote them before she died, asked me to hold them until you seemed ready. I think maybe you're ready now." They met for coffee, and Ruth handed over a small box that felt impossibly heavy. Inside were envelopes addressed to Elena in her mother's handwriting, dated in the final months of her life. Elena waited until she was home, alone in her apartment, before opening the first one. The letters were everything: apology and explanation, love and regret, her mother's attempt to make peace with the choices that had shaped both their lives. Sarah wrote about loving Damien's father despite knowing what he was, about running when she found out about her brother's murder, about building a life for Elena that was clean, even if built on foundations of grief and fear. The final letter, dated a week before Sarah died, hit Elena hardest. My darling girl, by the time you read this, you'll know everything I tried to hide. I'm sorry for the secrets, for the running, for building your life on fear I couldn't escape. I thought keeping you separate from that world would protect you. Instead, it just left you alone when I was gone. But here's what I learned too late to tell you while I was alive. Running doesn't save you. It just makes you tired. The only way to survive impossible circumstances is to face them directly, to build something better from the wreckage, instead of just avoiding the damage. I couldn't do that. I was too afraid, too broken by what I'd learned. But you're stronger than I ever was. Braver. If you ever find yourself in that world I ran from, don't do what I did. Don't hide. Don't let fear dictate your choices. Build something beautiful from the ugliness. Choose love over safety. Become the person I was too scared to be. That's my real legacy to you. Permission to be better than I managed. To face what I couldn't and transform it into something worth keeping. I love you more than words can hold. Be brave, my Elena. Be impossibly, fearlessly brave. Mom. Elena sat in her apartment holding her mother's final words, crying in a way she hadn't let herself cry since Sarah died. Not from grief exactly, but from the strange relief of being understood across time and death, of having her choices validated by the one person whose opinion she'd worried about most. Her mother would have been proud, would have understood why Elena stayed instead of ran, why she built instead of fled, why she chose transformation over the easier option of just walking away. That knowledge felt like being released from a weight she'd been carrying without realizing it. She called Damien that night, read him parts of the letter over the phone, and heard his voice catch when she got to the part about building something beautiful from ugliness. That's what we did, he said quietly. What we're still doing. Yeah, it is. Your mother would have liked the foundation, would have been proud of what you built. Our mothers, both of them. This is their legacy now, too. Yes, it is. They stayed on the phone in comfortable silence, siblings connected by impossible circumstances who'd chosen each other and kept choosing each other through every challenge. And Elena felt the deep satisfaction of having found her place in a world that should have destroyed her. 5 years after Elena accidentally walked into Damien's private dinner, the Sarah and Catherine Crossvale Foundation held its largest event yet, a gala celebrating their expansion into 15 cities and their model being adopted by community organizations nationwide. What had started as Elena's small project to give back had become a movement, proof that transformation could scale if you committed completely. Elena stood backstage preparing for her speech, and for once, she wasn't nervous. This was her world now. She'd earned it through years of exhausting work and stubborn refusal to quit when things got hard. Damien found her in the quiet. Nervous? He asked. Excited. There's a difference. There is. He straightened his tie, unnecessary since it was already perfect, and Elena recognized the gesture as nervousness. Damien didn't get nervous often. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He stopped, started over. I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when this is all done. The foundation is part of that, the transformation of the family business, all of it. But there's something missing. What? Continuation. Someone to carry this forward when we're gone. He met her eyes. I want to adopt. Give a kid the chance we build for others through the foundation. Make our family actually mean something beyond just blood. Elena felt her breath catch. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. This empire my father built, it dies with me unless I give it a different kind of heir. Someone I choose, who I raise to value what we value, to build instead of destroy. He was quiet for a moment. I'd like your help, raising them, being the family they deserve. Of course. Yes. Obviously, yes. He smiled, genuine and warm, and Elena saw glimpses of the person he'd have been if he'd been born into different circumstances. Someone kind, dedicated, capable of enormous love when given permission to express it. They went on stage together, presented the foundation's impact to a room full of people who'd helped make it possible. And Elena felt the profound satisfaction of having built exactly what her mother had asked for, something beautiful from ugliness, transformation from destruction, proof that people could change if they committed completely. After the speeches, during the reception, Rafael Castellano approached with his own news. "I'm retiring," he said without preamble. "Fully. Handing my organization to my daughter who's been managing the legitimate transition. I'll consult, but the daily operations? I'm done. 65 years in this world is enough." "You've earned it," Damien said. "Your transition was flawless. I had good teachers." Rafael looked at Elena. "Your foundation model works. 15 other families have adopted it now, some completely, some partially. The landscape is changing. Another decade and organized crime as we knew it will be history. That's because of what you two built." Elena felt the weight of that accomplishment, the ripple effect spreading beyond anything she'd imagined when she first proposed helping vulnerable women rebuild their lives. Later, as the gala wound down and guests filtered into the night, Elena and Damien stood together on the terrace overlooking gardens that had been the site of attacks and celebrations, violence and transformation. "We did it," Elena said. "Actually changed things. Made the world different." "We did, though it's still fragile, still requires constant maintenance." "Everything good does. That's not a flaw. It's just reality." Damien was quiet, then said something that made Elena's throat tight. "I'm glad you walked into that room. Glad you saw what you saw, that it brought you into my life. I know that's selfish. You almost died because of it. But I'm glad anyway." "I'm glad too. As impossible as that seems." Elena looked at her brother, this complicated man who'd given her purpose and family and a reason to believe transformation was possible. "We saved each other, I think. You from becoming your father, me from disappearing into the same fear that destroyed my mother. That's worth all the difficulty it took to get here." "Worth it, and then some." They stood together while the city glittered below them, two people who'd found each other through violence and chosen to build peace instead, and Elena felt complete in a way she'd never experienced before. Her mother had run from this world and died tired and afraid. Elena had walked into it accidentally and stayed deliberately, transforming it from the inside through sheer stubborn belief that people could be better than their worst choices. The waitress who'd trembled at a crime boss's command was gone. In her place was someone who'd built an empire of good from the ruins of a criminal legacy, who'd found family in impossible places, who'd proven that transformation was real if you committed completely. Elena Cross had rewritten her entire life, and in doing so had changed the trajectory of an entire underground economy. That felt like enough. Like everything. Like victory against odds that said she should have failed. In the greenhouse the next morning, tending to gardenias that had been blooming for years now, under their careful attention, Elena thought about cycles and choices. About the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. The journey had been terrifying and painful and impossible by every reasonable measure. She wouldn't trade a single moment of it. Damien joined her eventually, moving through the routine they'd developed over years of shared space and common purpose. They worked in comfortable silence, these siblings who'd found each other through catastrophe and built something beautiful anyway. And when Elena looked at what they'd created, the foundation, the transformed empire, the family they'd chosen to become, she felt nothing but quiet pride. Her mother had asked her to be brave, to face what Sarah couldn't and transform it into something worth keeping. Elena had done exactly that. And in the process, she'd discovered that family wasn't just blood or circumstances. It was the people you chose to stand beside when everything said you should run. It was building together when destruction would be easier. It was looking at impossible odds and deciding they didn't matter. It was finding your brother in a greenhouse full of flowers his mother had loved, and knowing without words that you'd both finally found the peace your parents never managed to claim. That was legacy. That was transformation. That was enough.